She had buried her husband 3 months ago. Now, in 6 hours, she would be forced to marry his brother, a man whose cold eyes promised a lifetime of control, silence, and fear. The dress hung white and waiting. The preacher had been paid. The doors were watched. Evelyn Marston had no money, no allies, no way out. Until a dusty stranger knocked on her door and whispered one impossible word: escape. This is her story. Stay until the very end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The morning of April 17th, 1878 arrived like a verdict. Evelyn Marston stood at the window of her small bedroom, watching the Nevada sun climb over the distant mountains, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold. It was beautiful, she thought distantly. It had always been beautiful here. The wide open sky, the smell of sagebrush after rain, the way the light fell soft and golden through her lace curtains in the early hours. She used to love mornings like this. Now, they felt like a countdown. In exactly 8 hours at sunset, she would stand in the parlor of the Hale family estate and become the wife of Marcus Hale. Not because she loved him, not because she wanted to, but because Marcus had made it clear, with legal documents, with threats, with the quiet pressure of a man who owned half the town, that she had no other choice. Evelyn pressed her palm flat against the cool glass of the window. Thomas, she thought, her chest tightening, what would you tell me to do? But Thomas was dead. Her husband of 4 years, the only man who had ever looked at her like she was something precious, had been buried 3 months ago in the small cemetery at the edge of town. A fever had taken him in 6 days, 6 terrible, sweating, delirious days. And Evelyn had held his hand until the very end, until his fingers went cold and his chest stopped rising, and then she had screamed until her voice gave out. The grief had been unbearable, but what came after was worse. Thomas's older brother, Marcus, had appeared at the funeral with a lawyer and a document. He had stood over her husband's fresh grave and told Evelyn, in that flat, emotionless voice of his, that Thomas had named him executor of the estate. That the mercantile store Thomas had built, the one Evelyn had helped run for 4 years, was now under Marcus's control. That the house they had shared, the savings they had earned, the life they had built together, all of it belonged to Marcus now. But there is a solution, Marcus had said, his cold blue eyes fixed on her face. A practical one. Evelyn had stared at him, numb with shock and grief. Marry me, Marcus said, and everything stays as it was. The store, the house, your place in this town. I'll take care of you, Evelyn, the way Thomas would have wanted. She had said no. She had said no 100 times in the weeks that followed, politely at first, then firmly, then desperately. But Marcus did not accept rejection. Marcus did not understand the word no, and slowly, methodically, he had begun to close every door she might have escaped through. Her access to the store's accounts was revoked. Her credit at the general store was canceled. The lawyer in town, the only lawyer in town, refused to take her case. The sheriff, a man Marcus had helped elect, told her gently that family matters were not his concern. And then, 3 days ago, Marcus had come to her house with the final ultimatum. The wedding will be Saturday, he said, standing in her parlor like he already owned it. At sunset, Pastor Collins will officiate. I've already spoken to him. Evelyn had risen from her chair, her hands shaking. I will not marry you, Marcus. I don't love you. I don't even like you. You can't force me. Can't I? Marcus had smiled then, a thin, cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. Evelyn, let me be plain with you. If you refuse this marriage, I will have you declared unfit to manage your own affairs. I have a doctor in Carson City who will testify that you've been unstable since Thomas's death, hysterical, prone to delusions. Her blood had run cold. That's a lie. Is it? Marcus shrugged. Perhaps. But it won't matter what's true. It will matter what the judge believes. And Judge Crawford is an old friend of mine. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. You will be committed to an asylum, Evelyn. You will lose everything, the house, the store, your freedom. You will spend the rest of your days in a locked room, and no one will ever hear your voice again. Evelyn had felt the floor tilt beneath her. Or, Marcus continued softly, you can marry me. Live comfortably. Be protected. All I ask is obedience. Is that truly so terrible? She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Marcus had left her standing there, trembling, and paused at the door. Saturday, sunset. Don't make this difficult, Evelyn, for your own sake. Now Saturday had arrived, and Evelyn was running out of time. She turned away from the window and looked at the white dress hanging on her wardrobe door. It wasn't her wedding dress. Her real wedding dress, the one she had worn when she married Thomas, was packed away in a trunk in the attic. This dress was new. Marcus had sent it yesterday, along with a pair of pearl earrings and a note that read simply, "Wear these." Evelyn hated the dress. She hated the earrings. She hated everything Marcus represented. Control, possession, the belief that a woman was property to be transferred from one man to another. But what could she do? She had tried everything. She had written letters to distant relatives, but received no replies. She had attempted to withdraw money from the bank, but Marcus had frozen the accounts. She had even tried to leave town 2 weeks ago, packing a bag and walking to the stagecoach office in the gray light of dawn, only to find 2 of Marcus's men waiting there, their arms crossed, their message clear. You're not going anywhere. The town of Yarrington was small, and Marcus Hale was its uncrowned king. His family had founded the place 40 years ago. His money funded the church, the school, the sheriff's office. Half the men in town owed him debts, the other half owed him favors. And everyone knew that crossing Marcus Hale was a mistake you only made once. Evelyn had no allies here, no protectors, no one willing to stand against the most powerful man in the territory for the sake of one widow. She was alone, completely alone. Evelyn sank onto the edge of her bed and pressed her hands to her face. She would not cry. She had cried enough in the past 3 months, enough tears to fill an ocean, enough grief to drown in. Crying wouldn't save her. Nothing would save her. In 6 hours, she would be Marcus Hale's wife, and she would never be free again. The knock came at exactly 10 o'clock. Evelyn startled, her heart lurching into her throat. She hadn't been expecting anyone. The ceremony wasn't until sunset, and Marcus had made it clear that she was to rest and prepare until then. His men were watching the house. She had seen them through the window, 2 figures lounging near the fence, pretending to be casual. Another knock, firmer this time. Evelyn smoothed her hands over her simple gray dress. She refused to put on that white monstrosity until the last possible moment and walked to the front door. Her fingers trembled as she turned the handle. The man standing on her porch was a stranger. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, weathered look of someone who spent his life outdoors. His clothes were dusty from travel, worn leather boots, denim trousers, a faded blue shirt rolled up at the sleeves. A battered hat shaded his face, but Evelyn could see his eyes clearly, storm blue and sharp, taking in everything at once. There was a quality to his stillness that reminded her of a coiled spring or a hawk watching from a fence post. Dangerous, she thought instinctively. This man was dangerous? But there was something else in his expression, something that looked almost like compassion. "Mrs. Marston?" His voice was low and rough, like gravel over river stones. Evelyn's grip tightened on the door. "Who's asking?" "Name's Rhett Callahan." He glanced over his shoulder, quick and casual, checking the street. "I'm a friend of Samuel Price. He sent me." Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. Samuel Price. 3 weeks ago, in a moment of pure desperation, she had written a letter. Not to any of her useless relatives, not to any lawyer or lawman, but to Samuel Price, an old friend of Thomas's who lived in California. She and Thomas had visited him once, years ago, and she remembered him as kind and capable and fiercely loyal to those he cared about. She had begged him for help, poured out her whole terrible situation in 10 cramped pages, and posted the letter secretly through a sympathetic stable boy. She had never received a reply. She had assumed the letter was lost, or that Samuel had decided not to get involved, or that Marcus had somehow intercepted it. She had given up hope, and now this stranger was standing on her porch, speaking Samuel's name. "I don't—" Evelyn's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. I don't know what you're talking about. Rhett Callahan met her eyes steadily. Yes, ma'am, you do. He reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. Even from a distance, Evelyn recognized it, her handwriting, her words, the desperate pleas she had sent into the void. Samuel got your letter a week ago, Rhett said quietly. He wanted to come himself, but his wife just had a baby, couldn't leave her, so he asked me to come in his place. His gaze was direct, unwavering. He asked me to get you out. Evelyn stared at him. For a long moment, she couldn't speak, couldn't think. The world seemed to tilt and blur around her, and she gripped the doorframe to keep herself upright. Get you out. 3 words. 3 impossible words. She stopped, swallowed. How do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know Marcus didn't send you to test me? It was a fair question. Marcus was cunning. She wouldn't put it past him to send someone to see if she was planning to run. But Rhett Callahan didn't seem offended. He simply nodded, like he had expected the question, and said, In your letter, you mentioned a picnic. By a river. You said Samuel told Thomas a story about a runaway horse and a particularly stubborn goat. You said Thomas laughed so hard he fell in the water. Evelyn's breath caught. She had never told anyone that story. It wasn't in any other letter. It was a private memory, a precious one, and she had included it only so Samuel would know the letter was truly from her. This stranger knew, which meant Samuel had told him, which meant, Oh God, she whispered, it's real. You're real. Rhett's expression softened slightly. Yes, ma'am. I'm real, and I'm here to help you, if you'll let me. Well, Evelyn stepped back from the door, her legs unsteady. Come inside, quickly, before anyone sees. Rhett moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to not being noticed. He slipped through the doorway, and Evelyn closed the door behind him, throwing the bolt for good measure. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her temples. There are men watching the house, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 2 of them. They're Marcus's. They've been there for weeks. I saw them. Rhett removed his hat and held it in his hands. In the dim light of her parlor, she could see his face more clearly now, a strong jaw, a scar near his left eyebrow, the kind of face that had seen hardship and survived it. They're not very good at their job, bored, distracted. That's good for us. Good for... Evelyn shook her head, trying to clear it. Mr. Callahan, I don't understand. Even if I wanted to run, and believe me, I want to, I can't. Marcus has men everywhere. He's watching the roads, the stagecoach, everything. If I try to leave, they'll catch me before I reach the edge of town. Which is why you won't leave by the roads, Rhett said calmly, and you won't take the stagecoach. He crossed to the window and peered out through the curtains, studying the street with the practiced eye of a man who knew how to read a battlefield. Evelyn watched him, her mind racing. You have a plan, she said. It wasn't a question. Rhett turned back to her. I have a plan. But before I explain it, there are some things you need to know. He paused, and something flickered in his storm-blue eyes. Anger, she realized. Cold, controlled anger. Things about your husband's will, about Marcus, about why this marriage isn't just about controlling you. Evelyn sank into a chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Tell me. Rhett leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. Samuel did some digging before he sent me. Talked to a lawyer friend in Sacramento. Apparently your husband's original will left everything to you. The store, the house, all of it. There was a provision for Marcus, but only a small one. Thomas didn't trust his brother. He made that clear. I know, Evelyn said softly. Thomas told me. He said Marcus had always been difficult, controlling. He said that's why he moved here, to get away from him. Right, but the will that Marcus showed you, the one that names him executor and gives him control of the estate, that's not the original will. Rhett's jaw tightened. It's a forgery, or at least partially forged. Someone altered key passages, added clauses that weren't there before. Samuel's lawyer is certain of it. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. A forgery? Yes, ma'am. Marcus doesn't have a legitimate claim to any of this, but he's got the only copy of the will that anyone in this territory has seen, And the judge who would rule on any challenge, Judge Crawford, Evelyn whispered, is in his pocket. Bought and paid for. Rhett shook his head. It's a neat little trap. Marcus gets the estate, gets you as a wife to make it all look respectable, and nobody asks questions because nobody wants to cross him. Evelyn stared at the floor, trying to process what she was hearing. It made a horrible kind of sense. Thomas had always said his brother was ruthless, willing to do whatever it took to get what he wanted. But forging a will? Trapping a widow into marriage? It was monstrous. Why? She asked finally. Why go to all this trouble? Marcus has money of his own. Why does he need Thomas's estate so badly? Rhett hesitated. I don't know all the details, but Samuel's lawyer mentioned something about debts. Big ones. Gambling, mostly. Marcus has been bleeding money for years, keeping up appearances while his accounts run dry. Your husband's store, the savings, the property, it's worth more than people realize. It's probably the only thing keeping Marcus afloat. So I'm not just a convenience. Evelyn's voice was bitter. I'm a solution to his problems. You're both, Rhett said quietly. And that's what makes him dangerous. He needs this marriage to happen. He needs you under his control, which means if you try to run and he catches you, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Evelyn sat very still, her mind churning. Everything she had suspected about Marcus, every instinct that had told her to be afraid of him, had just been confirmed. This wasn't about love. It wasn't even about control, not entirely. It was about survival. Marcus's survival. And he would do anything to ensure it, including destroying her. What's your plan? She asked. Rhett studied her for a moment, as if gauging whether she was ready to hear it. Then he nodded and began to speak. Marcus's men are watching the front of the house and the road out of town. They're not watching the back. There's a garden gate that leads to an alley. I scouted it this morning. If you leave through the garden, you can make it to the back of the livery stable without being seen. The livery? But Marcus will have people there too. Not behind it. Rhett held up a hand. There's a wagon waiting in a storage barn about 50 yards past the livery. A friend of Samuel's arranged it. Hay wagon, nothing suspicious. At 4 o'clock this afternoon, that wagon is going to leave town heading west, toward the Sierra Nevada. You'll be hidden in the back, under a false floor. Evelyn's heart was pounding. And you? I'll be driving. Rhett's expression was calm, matter of fact. By the time Marcus realizes you're not in the house, we'll be 10 miles out of town. By the time he organizes a search, we'll be in the mountains. And by the time he figures out which way we went, we'll be across the California border. It sounded simple. Too simple. What about the men watching the house? Evelyn asked. They'll notice if I leave. They'll follow me. That's where the diversion comes in. A faint smile crossed Rhett's weathered face. At 3:45, there's going to be a commotion in town. A fire. Not a big one, just enough smoke to draw attention. Everyone will be looking the other way. That's when you slip out. A fire? Evelyn stared at him. You're going to start a fire? Nothing that'll hurt anyone. An old shed on the edge of town, abandoned for years. It'll burn fast, draw a crowd, and give you the window you need. Rhett met her eyes steadily. I know it sounds risky. It is risky, but it's the best chance you've got. Evelyn was silent for a long moment. The best chance she'd got. It was terrifying. The idea of running, of defying Marcus, of putting her life in the hands of a stranger she'd known for less than 10 minutes, it went against every cautious instinct she possessed. For 3 months, she had been powerless. For 3 months, she had told herself there was nothing she could do, that resistance was futile, that Marcus would always win. But here was a door, a crack of light in the darkness. All she had to do was walk through it. What do I need to do? She asked. Rhett outlined the plan in careful detail. At 3:30, Evelyn would dress in her plainest traveling clothes. Something dark, something that wouldn't stand out. She would pack one small bag, nothing more. The essentials only, money, if she had any hidden, documents, anything irreplaceable. Leave everything else, Rhett said. It'll slow you down and tip off anyone who sees you that you're running. At 3:45, when the diversion started, she would slip out the back door, through the garden, and into the alley. She would keep her head down, walk quickly, but not run. Running attracted attention. She would make her way to the storage barn behind the livery, where Rhett would be waiting with the wagon. "Don't stop for anything," he said. "Don't talk to anyone. If someone calls out to you, ignore them. Just keep moving." And then, once she was safely hidden in the wagon, they would drive west, out of Yarrington, out of Marcus's reach, into a new life. If everything went according to plan, if they weren't caught. Evelyn listened, nodded, asked clarifying questions. She forced herself to stay calm, to think clearly, to focus on the details rather than the enormity of what she was about to attempt. Panic wouldn't help her. Only action would help her now. "There's something else," Rhett said, his voice growing quieter. "Something you should know before we do this." Evelyn looked at him. "What?" "If we fail, if they catch us, I won't be able to protect you from the consequences." His storm blue eyes were grave. "Marcus won't let this go. If he finds out you tried to run, especially with outside help, he'll make an example of you, the asylum he threatened you with. That'll be the best case." A chill ran down Evelyn's spine. "I know," she said softly. "And you still want to do this?" Evelyn thought about the white dress hanging in her bedroom. She thought about Marcus's cold eyes, his thin smile, the casual way he had threatened to destroy her life. She thought about spending the rest of her days in a loveless marriage to a man who saw her as nothing more than property. And then she thought about Thomas. Thomas, who had loved her. Thomas, who had built a life with her. Thomas, who had always said that she was the bravest woman he'd ever known. "Be brave," he had whispered to her once on a night when she was afraid. "You're stronger than you think." "Yes," Evelyn said. Her voice was steady now, steadier than she felt. "I still want to do this." Rhett nodded slowly. "All right then." He reached out and offered his hand, rough, calloused, the hand of a man who worked for a living. "We leave at 4. Be ready." Evelyn took his hand, and for the first time in 3 months, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope. The hours that followed were the longest of Evelyn's life. After Rhett left, slipping out the back door, disappearing into the alleys like a ghost, Evelyn forced herself to go through the motions of her normal routine. She made tea she didn't drink. She sat in her parlor and pretended to read a book she couldn't focus on. She moved past the windows occasionally, letting Marcus's watchers see that she was still there, still obedient, still waiting for her fate. Inside, her mind was racing. She moved through the house, silently gathering the things she would take with her. Money first. She had a small stash hidden in a false bottom of her sewing box, coins she had squirreled away over the years for emergencies. It wasn't much, maybe $50, but it was something. Her account book from the store, carefully maintained in her own handwriting. It proved her involvement in the business, proved that the store's success had been built partly on her work. Samuel's lawyer might find it useful. The locket her mother had given her before she died. A small gold oval with a tiny photograph inside. It was the only thing she had left of her family. And Thomas's photograph. A small tintype in a leather frame, taken on their wedding day. He was smiling in it, his eyes crinkled with joy, and every time she looked at it, she could almost hear his laugh. She tucked everything into a small carpet bag, the kind a woman might carry for a short trip. Then she hid the bag under her bed and returned to the parlor. 3:30, she told herself. Just hold on until 3:30. Mum. At 2 o'clock, there was another knock at the door. Evelyn's blood ran cold. She approached the door slowly, her heart pounding, and opened it to find a young woman standing on the porch. One of Marcus's servants, a girl named Lily, who worked in the Hale household. "Mrs. Marston." Lily bobbed a nervous curtsy. "Mr. Hale sent me to help you prepare for the ceremony." Evelyn felt her stomach clench. Of course, Marcus wasn't just having her watched. He was making sure she played her part. "Thank you, Lily." She forced a smile. "But I don't need any help. I prefer to prepare alone." Mr. Hale said, "I understand what Mr. Hale said." Evelyn kept her voice gentle but firm. "But this is still my house, Lily, and I am not yet his wife. You may tell him I will be ready by sunset, as agreed." Lily hesitated, clearly torn between obeying her employer and respecting the widow's wishes. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, ma'am, I'll tell him." She turned and walked away, and Evelyn closed the door, her hands trembling. 2 hours, she thought. Just 2 more hours. At 3:15, Evelyn changed her clothes. She put on a simple dress in dark brown, practical, unremarkable, the kind of thing a working woman might wear. She pulled her hair back in a plain bun and covered it with a bonnet. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a stranger looking back, pale, thin, with shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. "You can do this," she told herself. "You have to do this." She retrieved her carpet bag from under the bed and set it by the back door. Then she returned to the parlor and sat down, forcing herself to breathe slowly, to wait. The clock on the mantel ticked away the minutes. 3:20, 3:25, 3:30. And then, at 3:45 exactly, she heard it. A shout from somewhere in town, then another, and then the distant clang of a bell. The fire bell. The one that hung outside the general store. Evelyn stood up so fast she nearly knocked over her chair. Through the window, she could see people running past her house, heading toward the source of the commotion. Even the 2 men who had been watching her fence were moving, craning their necks to see what was happening. Now, she thought. Now or never. She grabbed her bag, slipped out the back door, and stepped into the unknown. The alley behind her house was narrow and shadowed, hemmed in by wooden fences and the backs of other buildings. Evelyn moved quickly, her bag clutched against her chest, her heart hammering in her ears. She kept her head down, her bonnet shading her face, and forced herself not to run. Walk quickly, don't attract attention, just keep moving. The sounds of the commotion grew louder, shouts, the crackle of flames, the clatter of a bucket brigade forming. Evelyn didn't look back. She couldn't afford to look back. The alley twisted and turned, and she followed it blindly, trusting Rhett's directions. Past the blacksmith shop, past the back of the boarding house, past a stack of empty crates that smelled like old potatoes. And then she saw it. The storage barn, weathered and gray, its doors slightly ajar. Evelyn slipped inside. The barn was dim and dusty, filled with old farm equipment and piles of hay. In the center of the space sat a wagon, just as Rhett had described, with a canvas cover stretched over the back. Rhett was there, checking the harness on a pair of sturdy horses. He looked up when she entered, and something like relief flickered across his face. "You made it." "I made it." Evelyn's voice was breathless. "What now?" Rhett moved to the back of the wagon and lifted the canvas. Beneath it, the wagon bed appeared to be full of hay bales, but when Rhett shifted one of them aside, Evelyn saw a narrow space hollowed out beneath, just large enough for a person to lie flat. "Get in," Rhett said. "Keep quiet. Don't move until I tell you it's safe." Evelyn looked at the dark, cramped space, and for a moment, her courage wavered. It looked like a coffin. It looked like a grave. But then she thought about Marcus, about the white dress, about the life that was waiting for her if she stayed. She climbed into the wagon, lowered herself into the hidden compartment, and pressed her bag against her chest like a lifeline. Rhett arranged the hay bales over her, and suddenly she was in darkness, complete suffocating darkness, the weight of the hay pressing down on her from above. 30 minutes, Rhett's voice filtered through the hay, muffled but calm. "Just hold on for 30 minutes, and we'll be clear of town." Evelyn closed her eyes. 30 minutes. She could do that. She had to do that. The wagon lurched into motion, and Evelyn felt every bump and jolt of the road through the thin wooden planks beneath her. The hay scratched against her skin and made her want to sneeze. The darkness pressed in on her from all sides, thick and close and terrifying. She focused on her breathing. In and out. In and out. Slow and steady, the way Thomas had taught her when she was overwhelmed. "You're going to be okay," she told herself. "You're going to survive this." She heard sounds from outside. The murmur of voices, the clatter of hooves, the general noise of a town still reeling from the fire. The wagon didn't stop. It kept moving, steady and unhurried, just another hay wagon heading out for a delivery. Minutes passed. Evelyn lost track of time in the darkness. And then, after what felt like an eternity, she heard Rhett's voice again. "We're past the town limits. You can breathe easy now." But Evelyn didn't breathe easy. She wouldn't breathe easy until they were miles away, until the mountains were between her and Yarrington, until Marcus Hale was nothing but a bad memory. She pressed her hand against her mother's locket, feeling the cool metal through the fabric of her dress. I'm coming, she thought. I don't know where I'm going, but I'm coming. And the wagon rolled on, carrying her toward freedom, or toward disaster. The sun was beginning to set when Rhett finally stopped the wagon. They had been traveling for hours, climbing steadily into the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. The road had grown rougher, the landscape wilder, and Evelyn had felt every mile of it in her aching bones. But when Rhett lifted the hay bales and helped her out of the hidden compartment, she found herself looking at one of the most beautiful sights she had ever seen. The mountains rose before her, their peaks touched with the last golden light of day. Pine forests covered the slopes, dark and ancient and vast. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of earth and trees and freedom. Evelyn stood beside the wagon, breathing deeply, and felt tears prick at her eyes. Are you all right? Rhett asked. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Yes, I'm all right. She shook her head, unable to find the words. I didn't think I'd ever see this. I didn't think I'd ever get out. Rhett nodded, his expression understanding. You're out, but we're not safe yet. We need to keep moving. He was right, of course. They were still too close to Yarrington, still within reach of Marcus's men. But for just this moment, this one precious moment, Evelyn allowed herself to feel something other than fear. She felt free. They made camp that night in a small clearing, hidden from the road by a thick stand of pines. Rhett built a fire, small, carefully shielded, just enough to warm them, and shared his provisions: dried beef, hard biscuits, a canteen of water. It was the best meal Evelyn had ever tasted. They sat across from each other, the firelight flickering between them, and for a while neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had been through something together, who didn't need words to fill the space. Finally, Evelyn asked the question that had been nagging at her since that morning. Why are you doing this? Rhett looked at her. What do you mean? This. She gestured at the fire, the wagon, the dark forest around them. Helping me. Risking your life for a stranger. Samuel asked you to come, but you didn't have to say yes. You could have refused, so why didn't you? Rhett was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost reluctant. Because I've seen what men like Marcus Hale do to people. To women, especially. He paused, and something hard flickered in his eyes. I had a sister once, Charlotte. She was kind, gentle, the best person I ever knew. She married a man who seemed respectable at first, wealthy, charming, all the right words. But behind closed doors, he was a monster. Evelyn's heart clenched. What happened to her? She died. The words were flat, empty. Tried to leave him, and he killed her for it. Made it look like an accident. Everyone believed him, everyone except me. Oh, Rhett. I was 18 years old. He picked up a stick and poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. Too young and too stupid to do anything about it. Too scared to speak up. I've carried that guilt with me ever since. Evelyn didn't know what to say. She wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but she sensed that Rhett wasn't looking for sympathy. He was simply telling her the truth. When Samuel told me about your letter, Rhett continued, when he described what Marcus was doing to you, I couldn't walk away. I couldn't let another woman suffer because I was too afraid to act. He met her eyes across the fire. So I said yes, and I'd say yes again 100 times over if it meant giving you a chance at freedom. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Something passed between them. An understanding, a connection, a shared recognition of pain and survival, and the desperate hope for something better. Thank you, Evelyn said softly. I don't know how I can ever repay you. Rhett shook his head. You don't owe me anything. Just promise me you'll live. Really live. Make something good out of all this. I promise, Evelyn said, and she meant it. They set out again at first light, pushing deeper into the mountains. Rhett drove the wagon with quiet competence, navigating the narrow, winding roads with the ease of long experience. Evelyn sat beside him on the driver's bench, watching the forest scroll past, marveling at the beauty of a world she had almost never seen. They talked as they traveled, about little things at first, safe topics like the weather and the road and the names of the trees they passed. But as the hours wore on, the conversation deepened. Evelyn told Rhett about Thomas, about their life together, about the dreams they had shared. Rhett told her about his years as a drifter, moving from job to job across the West, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. "Don't you ever get lonely?" Evelyn asked. Rhett considered the question. "Sometimes, but lonely is better than trapped. At least when you're free, you can choose your own path, even if that path leads nowhere." Evelyn nodded slowly. She understood that now, in a way she never had before. Freedom wasn't comfortable. Freedom was terrifying, but it was also everything. By mid-afternoon, they had climbed high into the mountains. The air was thinner here, colder, and patches of snow clung to the shaded slopes. The road had dwindled to little more than a track, barely wide enough for the wagon. That was when Evelyn heard the sound that made her blood freeze. Hoofbeats. Behind them, coming fast. She turned in her seat, her heart lurching, and saw them. 3 riders emerging from the trees a quarter-mile back, their horses at a full gallop. "Rhett, I see them." His voice was calm, but his hands tightened on the reins. "Hold on." He snapped the reins, urging the horses into a run. The wagon lurched forward, bouncing over rocks and ruts, and Evelyn grabbed the seat to keep from being thrown off. Behind them, the riders were gaining. "They're too fast," Evelyn shouted over the thunder of hooves. "They'll catch us." Rhett's jaw tightened. "Not if I can help it." He steered the wagon off the main road and onto a narrow side trail, barely visible through the underbrush. Branches slapped against the canvas cover as they plunged into the forest, the wagon swaying dangerously on the uneven ground. The riders followed. Evelyn's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. She could hear the men shouting now, their voices harsh and angry, promising violence. "They found us," she thought desperately. "Marcus found us." "There's a ravine up ahead," Rhett said through gritted teeth. "Bridge is old, barely standing. If we can get across before they catch us—" "And if we can't?" He didn't answer. The bridge appeared ahead of them, a rickety wooden structure spanning a deep gorge. Far below, Evelyn could see the white rush of a mountain river. Rhett didn't slow down. He drove the wagon straight onto the bridge, the planks groaning and creaking beneath them. Evelyn closed her eyes and prayed. The wagon rattled across, board splintering, the whole structure swaying, and then they were on the other side, solid ground beneath them, the bridge collapsing into the ravine behind them in a cascade of rotten wood. The riders skidded to a halt on the far side, their horses rearing. One of them shouted something, a curse, a threat, but the words were lost in the roar of the river below. Rhett pulled the wagon to a stop and let out a long, slow breath. "That," he said quietly, "was too close." Evelyn stared at the ruined bridge, her whole body trembling. They had made it. Against all odds, they had made it. But she knew, with a cold certainty, that this wasn't over. Marcus Hale wouldn't give up that easily. And somewhere behind them, hidden in the mountains, more hunters were waiting. The dust hadn't even settled on the far side of the ravine before Rhett was moving again. He snapped the reins and urged the horses forward, steering the wagon deeper into the forest, away from the ruined bridge and the furious men stranded on the other side. Evelyn sat rigid on the bench beside him, her fingers aching from how tightly she gripped the wooden seat. She could still hear the echo of the riders' shouts, could still see their faces twisted with rage as they watched their quarry slip away. One of them, a heavy-set man with a red bandana, had pulled a rifle from his saddle and taken aim, but the distance was too great, and the shot had gone wild, splintering a tree trunk 20 feet to their left. "Will they follow?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "They'll try." Rhett's eyes were fixed on the narrow trail ahead, reading the terrain with practiced intensity. That ravine runs for miles in both directions. They'll have to backtrack, find another crossing. It'll take them hours, maybe until morning if we're lucky. And if we're not lucky? Rhett didn't answer. He didn't need to. They pushed on through the afternoon, climbing higher into the mountains as the shadows lengthened and the temperature dropped. The forest grew denser here, ancient pines pressing close on either side, their branches interlocking overhead to form a dark canopy that blocked out the fading sun. The trail, if it could even be called that, twisted and turned, sometimes disappearing entirely before reappearing 100 yards ahead. Evelyn watched Rhett navigate with a mixture of awe and exhaustion. He seemed to know these mountains intimately, reading the landscape like other men read books. Every fork in the path, every fallen log, every rocky outcropping, he processed it all instantly, making decisions without hesitation. "You've been here before," she said. "A few times." His voice was distant, distracted. "Spent a winter trapping up here years ago, before I knew better." "Better than what?" "Better than freezing half to death for a handful of beaver pelts." A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. "There are easier ways to make a living. Turns out I'm better at helping people than skinning animals." Evelyn wanted to ask more, wanted to know everything about this strange, quiet man who had risked his life for her, but exhaustion was settling into her bones like lead. The adrenaline that had carried her through the escape was fading, leaving behind a profound weariness that made even breathing feel like an effort. "There's a line shack about 2 miles ahead," Rhett said, as if reading her thoughts. "Old trapper's cabin. We can rest there for a few hours. Let the horses recover." "Is it safe?" "Safer than being out in the open." He glanced at her, and something softened in his expression. "You need to sleep, Mrs. Marston. You're running on empty." She wanted to argue, to insist that she was fine, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she simply nodded and turned her face toward the darkening forest, watching the shadows deepen between the trees. Somewhere behind them, Marcus's men were searching for another way across the ravine. Somewhere ahead, safety waited, if they could reach it in time. And in the space between, Evelyn Marston allowed herself to hope. The line shack appeared just as the last light was fading from the sky, a small, weathered structure nestled in a clearing, its roof sagging and its walls gray with age. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, maybe decades, but to Evelyn's exhausted eyes, it might as well have been a palace. Rhett pulled the wagon into the clearing and jumped down, moving quickly to check the perimeter. He circled the cabin once, twice, peering into the shadows between the trees before finally nodding with satisfaction. "Clear," he said. "Help me unhitch the horses." They worked in silence, their breath misting in the cold mountain air. The horses were lathered and tired, their heads drooping with exhaustion, and Evelyn felt a pang of guilt for pushing them so hard. But there had been no choice. There was never any choice, not when men with rifles were hunting you through the wilderness. Inside, the cabin was exactly what she had expected. A single room with a dirt floor, a stone fireplace, and a narrow wooden bunk against one wall. Cobwebs draped the corners, and a thick layer of dust covered every surface. But it was shelter. It was safety. And right now, that was all that mattered. Rhett built a fire, small, carefully banked to minimize the smoke, while Evelyn sank onto the bunk, too tired to even remove her bonnet. The flames crackled to life, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and slowly, blessedly, warmth began to seep into her frozen limbs. "You should eat something," Rhett said, pulling provisions from his saddlebag. "Keep your strength up." He handed her a strip of dried beef and a hardtack biscuit, and Evelyn forced herself to chew, tasting nothing. Her mind was elsewhere, back in Yarrington, back in the house she had shared with Thomas, back in the life that now seemed like it belonged to someone else. "Do you think he knows yet?" she asked quietly. "Marcus?" Rhett settled onto the floor across from her, his back against the wall. "He knows. Those were his men on our trail, probably sent the moment he realized you were gone." He paused, his jaw tightening. "The question is what he'll do next." "What do you mean?" "Marcus is a businessman. He thinks in terms of investments and returns." Rhett's voice was flat, analytical. "Right now, chasing you through the mountains is costing him time, money, and manpower. He has to decide whether you're worth the expense." Evelyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "You think he might give up?" "I think he might get creative." Rhett met her eyes across the fire, and she saw something hard and knowing in his gaze. Men like Marcus don't give up. They adapt. If he can't catch you himself, he'll find someone who can. He'll put a price on your head. A bounty? It's the fastest way to turn the whole territory into his search party. Every drifter, Every desperate man with a gun, every lawman who can be bought, they'll all be looking for you. The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She had known Marcus was dangerous, known he was ruthless, but hearing it laid out so starkly made her stomach clench with fear. "How much?" she whispered. "How much do you think he'll offer?" Rhett was quiet for a moment. "Enough. Enough to make men forget their principles. Enough to make them risk their lives." He shook his head slowly. "We need to move fast and stay invisible. Once we're across the California border, his influence fades. We just have to get there. And if we don't?" Rhett held her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Then we fight. And we keep fighting until there's nothing left to fight with." It wasn't reassurance, it wasn't comfort, but somehow it was exactly what Evelyn needed to hear. She wasn't alone in this. Whatever came next, she would face it with someone at her side. "Get some sleep," Rhett said, his voice gentling. "I'll keep watch. A few hours from now, we move again." Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she could stay awake, that she could help, but her body betrayed her. The warmth of the fire, the relative safety of the cabin, the bone-deep exhaustion of the past 24 hours. It all combined into an irresistible pull toward unconsciousness. She lay back on the narrow bunk, pulling her thin shawl around her shoulders, and let her eyes drift closed. Her last thought, before sleep claimed her, was of Thomas. She wondered what he would think of her now, running through the mountains with a stranger, fleeing from everything they had built together. Would he be proud of her? Would he understand? She hoped so. She desperately hoped so. The morning came too quickly. Evelyn woke to the sound of horses snorting and the smell of wood smoke, her body stiff and aching from the hard wooden bunk. Gray light filtered through the gaps in the cabin walls, and for a moment she didn't know where she was, didn't remember the escape, the chase, the ruined bridge. Then it all came flooding back, and she sat up so fast her head spun. Rhett was already outside, she realized. She could hear him moving around the clearing, checking on the horses, loading supplies into the wagon. She pushed herself to her feet, wincing at the protests from muscles she hadn't known she had, and stepped out into the cold mountain air. The world was transformed. Sometime during the night, clouds had rolled in, and a light snow had begun to fall. Delicate flakes drifting down from a pewter sky, dusting the trees and the ground with white. It was beautiful, achingly beautiful, and for a moment Evelyn just stood there, breathing it in. "Snow's good for us," Rhett said, not looking up from where he was adjusting the harness. "Covers our tracks, makes it harder for them to follow. And bad for us? Makes the roads treacherous, slows us down." He straightened and turned to face her, and she saw the lines of fatigue around his eyes. He hadn't slept at all, she realized. He had kept watch the entire night. "It's a trade-off, but I'll take hidden over fast any day." Evelyn nodded, hugging herself against the cold. "What's the plan?" "We keep heading west. There's a pass about 15 miles from here. If we can make it through before the snow gets heavy, we'll be in the clear. On the other side, there's a town, small place, off the main roads. We can rest there, resupply, figure out our next move." "And if the snow gets heavy before we reach the pass?" Rhett was quiet for a moment. "Then we find shelter and wait it out. Could be a few hours, could be a few days." A few days. Evelyn's heart sank at the thought. Every hour they delayed was another hour for Marcus to organize his pursuit, to spread word of her escape, to put that bounty on her head. But there was nothing to be done about the weather. Some things were beyond human control. She had learned that lesson when Thomas died. "Then we'd better get moving," she said. Rhett nodded, a flicker of approval in his storm-blue eyes. "Yes, ma'am, we'd better." They set out into the snow, the wagon creaking and groaning over the frozen ground. The horses moved slowly, their breath steaming in the frigid air, their hooves crunching through the thin layer of white that covered the trail. Evelyn sat beside Rhett on the driver's bench, a rough wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the forest scroll past in a blur of green and white. Neither of them spoke much. There didn't seem to be a need for words. The silence between them had grown comfortable, companionable, the silence of two people who understood each other without explanation. But as the morning wore on and the snow continued to fall, Evelyn found her thoughts drifting back to the night before, to what Rhett had told her about his sister, about the guilt he carried, about the reasons he had agreed to help a stranger escape from a dangerous man. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. Rhett glanced at her. "Depends on what it is." "The man who killed your sister. What happened to him?" For a long moment, Rhett didn't answer. His jaw tightened and something dark flickered in his eyes. Old pain, old rage, old grief that had never fully healed. "He lived," Rhett said quietly. "Lived and prospered. Married again a year later. Another young woman, another victim. I tried to warn her, but she didn't listen. Nobody listens until it's too late." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It's not your burden to carry." Rhett's hands tightened on the reins. "I tracked him for years, followed him from town to town, waiting for my chance. I was going to kill him. I was certain of it." Evelyn's breath caught. "What stopped you?" "He died." A bitter smile crossed Rhett's face. "Fell off his horse and broke his neck. A stupid, meaningless accident. No justice, no punishment, just nothing." "That must have been hard." "It was. For a long time I didn't know what to do with myself. All that anger, all that purpose, gone in an instant." Rhett shook his head slowly. "That's when Samuel found me. Gave me a job, gave me a reason to keep going, showed me there were other ways to fight, other ways to make a difference." Evelyn studied his profile, seeing him clearly for the first time, not just as a rescuer, not just as a stranger, but as a man who had suffered and survived, who had found meaning in helping others because he couldn't save the one person who mattered most. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. Rhett nodded but didn't speak. The snow continued to fall around them, silent and relentless, and they pushed on toward the pass. The first sign of trouble came around midday. They had been climbing steadily for hours, the trail growing steeper and narrower as they approached the summit. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes that reduced visibility to a few dozen yards and piled up on the wagon's canvas cover in heavy drifts. The horses were struggling, their muscles straining against the grade, and Evelyn could feel the wagon's wheels slipping on the icy ground. "How much farther?" she asked, shouting to be heard over the wind. "Half a mile, maybe less." Rhett's face was grim, his eyes narrowed against the swirling snow. "If we can just make it to the top." He never finished the sentence. A rifle shot cracked through the air, the sound sharp and unmistakable even over the howl of the wind. Evelyn screamed as splinters exploded from the wagon's side, missing her head by inches. "Get down!" Rhett shouted, shoving her off the bench and onto the floor of the wagon. He grabbed his own rifle from beneath the seat and twisted around, scanning the white chaos behind them. Another shot rang out, then another. Evelyn pressed herself flat against the wooden planks, her heart hammering, her mind racing. They had found them. Despite the snow, despite the hidden trails, despite everything, Marcus's men had found them. "How many?" she gasped. "Can't tell. At least 3, maybe more." Rhett fired a shot into the swirling white, then ducked as a bullet whizzed past his ear. "They must have pushed through the night. Damn it, damn it." The horses screamed in terror, rearing against their harness, and the wagon lurched dangerously. Rhett fought to control them with one hand while firing with the other, but it was a losing battle. They were pinned down, outnumbered, with nowhere to go. "Rhett!" Evelyn shouted. "What do we do?" He turned to look at her, and in that moment she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not fear exactly, but calculation. The look of a man who was weighing impossible odds and coming up with a plan he didn't like. "There's another trail," he said quickly. "About 100 yards ahead, on the left. It's steep, too steep for the wagon, but the horses can make it. You take them and go. I'll stay here, hold them off, buy you time." Evelyn stared at him in horror. "No, absolutely not." "It's the only way." "I said no." She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into the leather of his jacket. "I'm not leaving you here to die. We go together or not at all." Another bullet slammed into the wagon, and Rhett flinched. His jaw was set, his eyes hard, but something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "You're a stubborn woman, Evelyn Marston." "I've been told that before." She grabbed the second rifle from beneath the seat. Thomas had taught her to shoot years ago, and she prayed she still remembered how. "Now tell me what to do." For a heartbeat, Rhett just looked at her. Then a grim smile crossed his face. All right, he said. Here's what we do. The plan was desperate. There was no other word for it. Rhett would drive the wagon forward at full speed, straight toward the pass, while Evelyn provided covering fire from the back. If they could reach the summit, the trail would narrow to a bottleneck, too tight for their pursuers to surround them, too exposed for an ambush. From there, it was all downhill, and downhill meant speed. It's a gamble, Rhett admitted. If the wheels slip, if the horses give out, if there are more of them waiting ahead, then we die, Evelyn said flatly. I understand. Let's go. She climbed into the back of the wagon, pushing aside hay bales and supply crates until she had a clear line of sight through the rear opening. The snow was blinding, a white curtain that seemed to swallow everything, but she could see dark shapes moving in the distance, riders closing fast. Now! Rhett shouted and snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward, the horses screaming with effort as they threw themselves against their harness. Evelyn braced herself against the tailgate and raised the rifle to her shoulder, sighting down the barrel at the nearest rider. She squeezed the trigger. The kick nearly knocked her backward, but she saw the rider jerk in his saddle, saw his horse veer wildly off course. She didn't know if she had hit him or just spooked his mount. Didn't care. She was already reloading, already aiming at the next target. Fire. Reload. Fire again. The world narrowed to a tunnel of noise and motion, the crack of gunshots, the thunder of hooves, the howl of the wind. Evelyn's hands were numb with cold, her eyes streaming, but she kept firing, kept fighting, kept refusing to give up. And then, suddenly, they were through. The wagon crested the summit and tipped forward, picking up speed as it hurtled down the far side of the pass. Behind them, the riders fell back, unable to follow at such a reckless pace. Evelyn slumped against the hay bales, her whole body shaking. They had made it. Somehow, impossibly, they had made it. The descent from the pass was a blur of speed and terror. The trail was narrow and treacherous, carved into the side of a steep ravine, and the wagon swayed dangerously with every turn. Rhett fought to control the horses, his arms straining against the reins, while Evelyn held on for dear life in the back, certain that at any moment they would tip over the edge and plunge into the abyss below. But Rhett knew what he was doing. He guided the wagon through the worst of the curves, slowing just enough to keep them from catastrophe, accelerating when the trail straightened out. Mile after mile fell away behind them, and the sounds of pursuit faded into silence. By the time they reached the valley floor, the snow had stopped and the clouds were beginning to break apart, revealing patches of pale blue sky. The horses were lathered and exhausted, their heads hanging low, and even Rhett looked drained, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly as he finally pulled the wagon to a halt. "We need to rest," he said, his voice hoarse. "The horses can't go any farther." Evelyn climbed down from the wagon on legs that felt like water. Her ears were ringing, her hands ached from gripping the rifle, and she was fairly certain she had bruises on top of bruises from being thrown around in the back. But she was alive. They were both alive. "Where are we?" she asked, looking around at the unfamiliar landscape, rolling hills, scattered pine groves, a frozen creek winding through the valley. "About 5 miles from town," Rhett said. "We can make it by nightfall if the horses recover." Evelyn nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about the riders on the pass, about the bullets that had missed her by inches, about the look in Rhett's eyes when he had told her to run. "You would have died for me," she said quietly. "Back there. You would have stayed behind and let them kill you." Rhett was silent for a moment, checking the horse's legs for injuries. "Maybe." "Why?" He straightened and turned to face her, and she saw something in his expression that she couldn't quite name, something raw and honest and deeply human. "Because some things are worth dying for," he said simply. "And you, Evelyn Marston, are one of them." She didn't know what to say to that, didn't know how to respond to such naked sincerity from a man she had known for less than 2 days. So she simply looked at him, this dusty stranger with storm blue eyes who had walked into her life and changed everything, and felt something shift in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope, something that felt dangerously like more. They reached the town just as the sun was setting, a small collection of buildings clustered around a single muddy street, unremarkable and easily overlooked, which, Rhett explained, was exactly why he had chosen it. Place is called Miller's Crossing, he said as they rolled past the first weathered storefronts. Population about 200. No telegraph, no stage line, nothing to attract attention. Perfect place to disappear for a day or two. Evelyn studied the town with wary eyes. After what they had been through, she wasn't sure she would ever feel safe again. Not truly safe, not the way she had felt before Thomas died and Marcus destroyed her world. But she had to trust someone. And right now, Rhett Callahan was the only person in the world she could rely on. They found lodging at a small boarding house on the edge of town, run by a weathered widow named Mrs. Patterson, who asked no questions and demanded payment in advance. The rooms were small and plain, but they were warm and clean, and that was all Evelyn cared about. "You should rest," Rhett said, standing awkwardly in the hallway between their rooms. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out our next move. But tonight, just rest." Evelyn nodded, suddenly aware of how close he was, how she could smell leather and wood smoke and something uniquely him. "What about you?" "I'll keep watch. Make sure we weren't followed." "Rhett." She reached out and touched his arm, stopping him before he could turn away. "You need rest too. You haven't slept in 2 days." "I'll be fine." "You won't be fine. You'll collapse, and then where will I be?" She tried to smile, but it came out shaky. "Please, just a few hours. I'll wake you if anything happens." For a long moment, Rhett just looked at her. Then, slowly, he nodded. "A few hours," he agreed. "But if you hear anything at all, you come get me." "I promise." He held her gaze for a heartbeat longer, and something passed between them, something unspoken, but understood. Then he stepped back, tipped his hat, and disappeared into his room. Evelyn stood in the hallway for a long moment, her hand pressed to her chest, feeling the rapid beat of her heart. What was happening to her? She had been married. She had loved Thomas with everything she had, and when he died, she had been certain that part of her, the part capable of feeling, of hoping, of wanting, had died with him. But now there was Rhett. Rhett, who had risked his life for her. Rhett, who had looked at her like she was worth fighting for. Rhett, who had somehow, impossibly, made her feel alive again. She didn't know what it meant, didn't know if it meant anything at all. But as she closed the door to her room and sank onto the narrow bed, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't ready to lose him. Not yet. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the sky a pale winter blue that seemed to stretch forever in every direction. Evelyn woke slowly, her body stiff but rested, her mind clearer than it had been in days. For a moment, she simply lay there, listening to the sounds of the town coming to life outside her window. The clatter of wagon wheels, the distant bark of a dog, the murmur of voices. Normal sounds, safe sounds, but she knew better than to trust them. She rose and dressed quickly, then made her way downstairs to the boarding house's small dining room. Rhett was already there, seated at a corner table with a cup of coffee and a newspaper spread before him. He looked up when she entered, and something flickered in his expression. Relief, she thought, or maybe just recognition. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I expected." She slid into the chair across from him, gratefully accepting the cup of coffee Mrs. Patterson brought over. "Any news?" Rhett's jaw tightened. "Some." He pushed the newspaper across the table, and Evelyn's heart sank as she read the headline on the front page. "Reward offered for runaway widow. $500 for information." Below it was a description, her description, and a name that made her blood run cold. Evelyn Marston, wanted for theft and abandonment of marital duties. Contact Marcus Hale, Yarrington, Nevada Territory. "Theft?" she whispered, her voice shaking with anger. "I didn't steal anything. Everything I took was mine, my clothes, my mother's locket, Thomas's photograph. Doesn't matter what's true," Rhett said grimly. "Matters what people believe. And Marcus has made sure everyone believes you're a criminal." Evelyn stared at the newspaper, feeling sick. $500. It was a fortune, more money than most people in these parts would see in years. For that kind of reward, men would do almost anything. "What do we do?" she asked. "We move carefully." Rhett folded the newspaper and set it aside. "Keep our heads down, avoid the main roads, stay away from towns where this paper might have reached." He paused, his storm blue eyes meeting hers. And we trust no one. Except each other. A faint smile crossed his face. Except each other. They left Miller's Crossing before noon, heading west along a series of back trails that Rhett seemed to know by heart. The landscape changed as they traveled, mountains giving way to rolling hills, pine forests yielding to oak groves and open meadows. It was beautiful country, wild and untamed, and under other circumstances Evelyn might have enjoyed the journey, but she couldn't enjoy anything. Not with a price on her head, not with Marcus's shadow stretching across every mile. They traveled for 3 days, sleeping in abandoned barns and beneath the stars, rationing their supplies and avoiding contact with other travelers. Rhett was vigilant, always watching, always listening, always ready for trouble, and Evelyn did her best to match his caution, keeping her bonnet pulled low and her eyes on the ground whenever they passed through populated areas. On the 4th day, they reached the outskirts of a larger town, a bustling mining settlement called Silver Creek, with saloons and hotels and streets crowded with prospectors and merchants. "We need supplies," Rhett said reluctantly. "Food, ammunition, a new wheel spoke for the wagon. We won't make it to California without them." "Can't we go around? This is the only town for 50 miles, and we're running low on everything." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You'll have to stay with the wagon while I go in. Keep hidden. Don't talk to anyone." Evelyn wanted to argue, hated the idea of being left alone, even for an hour, but she knew he was right. 2 people attracted more attention than one, and her face might be on a wanted poster nailed to every public building in town. "Be careful," she said. "Always am." He climbed down from the wagon and adjusted his hat. "I'll be back in an hour if something goes wrong, don't." She cut him off before he could finish. "Don't talk like that. You'll come back. You have to." Rhett looked at her for a long moment, and something softened in his expression. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "I'll come back." And then he was gone, disappearing into the crowded streets of Silver Creek, leaving Evelyn alone with her fear and her prayers. The hour passed slowly. Evelyn sat in the back of the wagon, hidden beneath the canvas cover, listening to the sounds of the town and trying not to imagine all the things that could go wrong. Every shout made her flinch. Every set of approaching footsteps made her heart race. She clutched Thomas's photograph in her hands like a talisman, drawing strength from his familiar face. 50 minutes, 55. And then finally she heard Rhett's voice, low and calm, deliberately casual, and the wagon shifted as he climbed back onto the driver's bench. "Got everything we need," he said. "And then some. Let's move." The wagon lurched into motion, and Evelyn didn't breathe normally until they were a mile outside of town, the buildings of Silver Creek shrinking in the distance behind them. "Any trouble?" she asked, climbing up to sit beside him. Rhett was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Found this nailed to the general store," he said. "Thought you should see it." Evelyn unfolded the paper with trembling hands. It was a wanted poster. Her wanted poster, with a crude sketch of her face and the same lies about theft and abandonment. But there was something new, something that made her stomach drop. Reward increased to $500. Bounty hunters authorized to use any means necessary. Any means necessary. Evelyn crumpled the poster in her fist, fighting back tears of rage and fear. "He won't stop," she whispered. "He'll never stop." Rhett reached over and took her hand. A simple gesture, but it steadied her, anchored her. "Then we won't stop either," he said. "We'll outrun him, outlast him. And when we get to California, when you're safe and free, he'll realize that you were never his to control, that you never will be." Evelyn looked at him, this stranger who had become so much more, this man who had fought for her and bled for her and refused to give up even when the odds seemed impossible. "Do you really believe that?" she asked. Rhett's storm blue eyes met hers, steady and sure. "I believe in you," he said, "and that's enough." The words hung in the air between them, warm and certain, and for the first time since leaving Yarrington, Evelyn felt something other than fear. She felt hope, real hope, and she held on to it with everything she had. They pushed on through the afternoon, putting as many miles as possible between themselves and Silver Creek. The terrain grew rougher as they traveled, the trail winding through rocky canyons and along the edges of steep cliffs. It was dangerous country. One wrong turn could send them tumbling into a ravine. But Rhett navigated with his usual skill, reading the landscape like a map only he could see. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they came upon a small farmhouse nestled in a valley. A weathered wooden structure with a barn and a chicken coop and smoke rising from the chimney. Rhett pulled the wagon to a halt. "We need to rest," he said. "The horses are spent, and that cliff trail ahead is suicide in the dark." Evelyn eyed the farmhouse uncertainly. "What about the bounty? Anyone could have seen those posters." "True, but we don't have much choice." Rhett climbed down from the wagon and approached the house slowly, his hands visible at his sides. "Let me do the talking." The door opened before he reached it, and an old man stepped out, weathered and bent, with a shock of white hair and eyes that had seen a lifetime of hard living. He held a shotgun in his gnarled hands, but he didn't raise it. "Evening," the old man said cautiously. "Help you with something?" "We're travelers," Rhett said easily. "Heading west, looking for a place to rest our horses for the night. We can pay." The old man studied him for a long moment, then shifted his gaze to the wagon and to Evelyn, who was watching from the driver's bench. "That your wife?" Rhett hesitated for just a heartbeat. "Yes, sir." The old man grunted. "Barn's open, water trough out back. You can bed down in the hay if you don't mind the smell." "We don't mind. Thank you kindly." The old man nodded slowly, lowering his shotgun. "Name's Emmett. Wife's inside. She'll bring you some supper later. Don't go wandering after dark. Wolves been bold this year." "Understood." And just like that, they had shelter for the night. The barn was warm and dry, filled with the comforting smell of hay and horses. Evelyn helped Rhett unhitch their exhausted team and settle them in empty stalls, working in companionable silence. It felt natural, she realized, this partnership they had developed, this unspoken understanding. It felt like something she hadn't experienced since Thomas died. It felt like home. Later, after Emmett's wife, a small, quiet woman named Martha, had brought them bowls of hot stew and thick slices of bread, they sat together in the hay, eating by the light of a single lantern. "That old man saw the poster," Evelyn said quietly. "I'm sure of it. The way he looked at me." "Maybe." Rhett sopped up the last of his stew with a piece of bread. "But he didn't say anything. Didn't try to stop us. Why? Not everyone believes what they read, and not everyone can be bought." He set down his empty bowl and leaned back against a hay bale. "There are still good people in this world, Evelyn. People who care more about what's right than what's profitable." Evelyn considered this, turning it over in her mind. It was a comforting thought, the idea that not everyone was her enemy, that some strangers might be willing to help rather than betray. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked. "To California?" "Yes." The certainty in his voice surprised her. "How can you be so sure?" Rhett was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the flickering flame of the lantern. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady. "Because I've been running my whole life," he said. "Running from my past, from my grief, from the man I used to be. I know what it's like to feel hunted, to feel like there's nowhere safe, no one you can trust." He turned to look at her, and the firelight caught the blue of his eyes. "But this is the first time I've run toward something instead of away, and that changes everything." Evelyn felt her breath catch. "What are you running toward?" Rhett held her gaze, and something shifted in the space between them, something electric and inevitable. "I think you know," he said softly. She did know. She had known for days, maybe longer. This pull between them, this connection that went deeper than gratitude or convenience. She had tried to ignore it, tried to tell herself it was too soon, too complicated, too dangerous. But sitting here in the hay-scented warmth of the barn, with this man who had risked everything for her, she couldn't ignore it anymore. "Rhett," she whispered, "you don't have to say anything." His voice was rough, almost uncertain. "I know you're still grieving. I know this isn't—" "I loved my husband," Evelyn said. "I loved him with everything I had, and losing him nearly destroyed me." She paused, gathering her courage. "But he's gone, and I'm still here. And for the first time since he died, I feel like that means something. She reached out and took Rhett's hand, feeling the warmth of his skin, the roughness of his calluses. I don't know what this is between us, she continued. I don't know where it leads, but I know that you make me feel safe. You make me feel like myself again, and right now, that's enough. Rhett was very still, his eyes searching her face. Then slowly, he lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then that's where we start, he said. They sat together in the lamplight, hands intertwined, and for the first time since leaving Yarrington, Evelyn allowed herself to imagine a future that didn't include fear, a future that included hope, a future that might, just might, include love. Outside, the wolves howled in the distance and the stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere far behind them, Marcus Hale was planning his next move. But in this moment, none of that mattered. In this moment, there was only warmth and safety, and the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. They left Emmett's farm before dawn, slipping away in the gray half-light, while the old man and his wife still slept. Rhett had insisted on leaving payment, more than the shelter was worth, tucked beneath a stone by the barn door. It was a small gesture, but it mattered to him, and Evelyn understood why. In a world that seemed determined to strip away every kindness, every decency, holding on to honor was the only way to stay human. The cliff trail Rhett had mentioned proved every bit as treacherous as he had warned. The path was barely wide enough for the wagon, carved into the side of a mountain that dropped away into nothingness. Evelyn kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look at the sheer drop to her left, while Rhett guided the horses with agonizing care, coaxing them forward one step at a time. It took 3 hours to cover 2 miles. By the time they reached solid ground again, Evelyn's hands were shaking and her jaw ached from clenching her teeth, but they had made it. They were through the worst of the mountain passes, and ahead of them stretched a vast expanse of forest, the western slope of the Sierra Nevada, thick with pines and alive with the sounds of birds and rushing water. California was close now. She could feel it. We'll make the border by tomorrow, Rhett said, as if reading her thoughts. Maybe sooner if the weather holds. Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. And then? Then we head for Sacramento. Samuel's family has a place there, a farm outside the city. You'll be safe. We can figure out the rest once you've had a chance to breathe. Safe. The word felt foreign, almost impossible. She had spent so long being afraid, so long looking over her shoulder, that she could barely remember what safety felt like. But she wanted to remember, desperately. What about you? She asked. After Sacramento, I mean. What will you do? Rhett was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the trail ahead. Haven't thought that far, he admitted. Guess I figured I'd see you settled first. Make sure you didn't need anything else. After that, he shrugged. There's always work for a man who knows how to handle himself. You could stay. The words came out before Evelyn could stop them, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. It was too forward, too presumptuous. They had known each other for less than a week, and whatever was growing between them was still fragile, undefined. But Rhett didn't seem offended. He glanced at her, and something flickered in his storm-blue eyes. Surprise, maybe, or hope. Could I? He asked softly. If you wanted to. She forced herself to hold his gaze, to be brave. I'm not asking you to make any promises. I'm just saying, you have a choice. You don't have to keep running. Rhett was silent for a long time, and Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. She had said too much, pushed too far. I'd like that, he said finally. Staying, if you'll have me. Relief flooded through her, warm and overwhelming. I'll have you. A slow smile spread across Rhett's face, transforming his weathered features, making him look younger somehow, lighter. Then that's settled. Evelyn smiled back, feeling something loosen in her chest. A knot of fear and loneliness that had been there so long she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. Maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. The gunshot shattered the moment like glass. It came from somewhere ahead of them, echoing through the trees, followed immediately by a chorus of shouts and the thunder of hooves. Rhett yanked the horses to a halt, his hand flying to the rifle beside him. Get down, he ordered, his voice sharp with sudden tension. Into the back, now! Evelyn didn't argue. She scrambled over the seat and into the wagon bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through a gap in the canvas, she could see riders emerging from the trees ahead, 5 of them, maybe 6, their horses blocking the trail, and leading them was a face she recognized. The man with the red bandana, the one who had chased them across the mountain pass. "Well, well," the man called out, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Thought you'd given us the slip, didn't you?" He grinned, revealing a mouth full of crooked teeth. "Marcus Hale sends his regards." Rhett's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "You're a long way from home, friend. Sure you want to do this?" $500 says I do." The man rested his hand on the pistol at his hip. "Now, you can make this easy or hard. Don't matter to me either way, but the lady's coming with us." "No," Rhett said. "She's not." The man's grin faded. "Have it your way." Everything happened at once. The man drew his pistol and fired, and Rhett threw himself sideways, the bullet whistling past his ear. He came up shooting, his rifle cracking twice in rapid succession, and 2 of the riders tumbled from their horses. The others scattered, seeking cover behind trees and rocks, and suddenly the forest was alive with gunfire. Evelyn pressed herself flat against the wagon bed, her hands over her ears, terror clawing at her throat. She could hear Rhett shouting, hear the horses screaming, hear the deafening roar of guns, but she couldn't see anything, couldn't do anything except lie there and pray. And then, suddenly, the wagon lurched into motion. Rhett had grabbed the reins and was driving the horses forward at a reckless gallop, straight toward the gap in the riders' formation. Bullets tore through the canvas above Evelyn's head, showering her with splinters, but Rhett didn't slow down. He whipped the horses harder, faster, and the wagon careened past the remaining riders and into the forest beyond. "Hold on!" Rhett shouted, and Evelyn grabbed the nearest handhold just as the wagon hit a root and went airborne for a terrifying second before crashing back down. They were running blind now, plunging through the trees at breakneck speed, branches slapping against the sides of the wagon. Behind them, Evelyn could hear the riders regrouping, their shouts growing fainter but not disappearing entirely. "They're following!" she yelled. "I know!" Rhett's voice was strained, desperate. "There's a river ahead. If we can cross it—" He never finished the sentence. The wagon's front wheel hit a hidden rock, and suddenly they were spinning, tilting, the world turning upside down. Evelyn screamed as she was thrown against the side of the wagon, felt the canvas tear, felt herself falling. And then everything went black. She woke to pain and darkness. Her head was throbbing, her vision blurred, and for a moment she couldn't remember where she was or what had happened. She was lying on something soft. Pine needles, she realized dimly, the forest floor. And above her, she could see patches of gray sky through a canopy of branches. "Rhett?" Her voice came out as a croak. "Rhett?" "Here." A hand touched her face, gentle and warm, and she turned her head to find him kneeling beside her. His face was pale, and there was blood on his forehead, a gash from the crash, she guessed. But he was alive. He was alive. "The wagon?" she asked. "Gone. Wheels shattered, axles broken." He helped her sit up slowly, his hands steady despite the exhaustion in his eyes. "We're on foot now." Evelyn looked around, trying to get her bearings. They were in a small clearing surrounded by dense pines, with no sign of the trail or the road or anything familiar. The wagon lay on its side a few yards away, broken and useless. "The horses?" "Ran off. Can't blame them." Rhett's jaw tightened. "I managed to grab some supplies before I pulled you out, but not much. Food for a day, maybe 2. The rifle, some ammunition." "And the riders?" "Lost them for now, but they won't stay lost for long." He met her eyes, and she saw the truth in them, the fear he was trying to hide. "We need to move. Can you walk?" Evelyn tested her limbs, wincing at the protests from her battered muscles. Everything hurt, but nothing seemed broken. "I can walk." "Good." Rhett helped her to her feet, his arm around her waist to steady her. "There's a river about half a mile west. If we can cross it, put some water between us and them, we might have a chance." A chance. Not a certainty. Not even a probability. But Evelyn had learned something about herself in the past week. She had learned that she was stronger than she thought, braver than she believed, more stubborn than Marcus Hale had ever imagined. And she was not going to give up now. "Then let's go," she said. They moved through the forest like ghosts, keeping to the shadows, avoiding open ground. Rhett led the way, his rifle in his hands, his eyes constantly scanning the trees around them. Evelyn followed close behind, matching his pace despite the pain in her legs and the pounding in her head. The river appeared sooner than she expected, a wide, fast-moving current that churned over rocks and fallen logs. The water was icy with snowmelt, and Evelyn's heart sank as she realized there was no bridge, no ferry, no easy way across. "We wade," Rhett said grimly, reading her expression. "It's shallow enough here, waist deep at most. But it's cold, and the current's strong. Stay close to me." "I will." He went first, stepping into the water with a sharp intake of breath as the cold hit him. Evelyn followed, gasping as the icy current swirled around her ankles, her knees, her waist. The rocks beneath her feet were slippery, treacherous, and twice she nearly fell before Rhett's hand shot out to steady her. They were halfway across when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Distant, but growing closer. "Faster," Rhett said, his voice tight with urgency. "They've found our trail." Evelyn tried to move faster, but the current was fighting her, dragging at her sodden skirts, threatening to sweep her feet out from under her. The far bank seemed impossibly far away, an eternity of cold water and slippery rocks. A shout from behind, the crack of a rifle. "Down!" Rhett yelled, and Evelyn plunged beneath the surface just as a bullet whined past her head. The cold was shocking, paralyzing, driving the breath from her lungs. She came up sputtering, gasping, her vision filled with spray and chaos. Rhett was beside her, pulling her toward the shore, his face set in a mask of determination. More shots, more shouts. The riders had reached the riverbank, and then, somehow, they were across. Rhett hauled Evelyn onto the far bank and dragged her into the cover of the trees, not stopping until they were deep in the forest, hidden from view. She collapsed against a pine trunk, shaking uncontrollably, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely think. "They won't cross here," Rhett said, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Water's too fast, too dangerous. They'll have to go upriver, find a ford." He looked at her, and she saw fear in his eyes, real fear, the kind she had never seen from him before. "But they will cross eventually. We don't have much time." "Then we keep moving," Evelyn managed through her chattering teeth. Rhett stared at her for a moment, something flickering in his expression. Then, incredibly, he smiled. "You're something else, Evelyn Marston. You know that?" "I've been told." He helped her to her feet, and they pushed deeper into the forest, leaving the river and its dangers behind. But not far enough behind. Never far enough. The next 3 days were the hardest of Evelyn's life. They traveled by night and hid by day, moving through terrain that would have challenged a mountain goat. Their clothes never fully dried, their food ran out after the second day. Evelyn's feet blistered, bled, and blistered again, and there were moments when she was certain she couldn't take another step. But she did. Again and again, she did. Because Rhett was there. Because he never complained, never showed weakness, never let her see how much he was suffering too. He found edible roots and berries when their supplies ran out. He built shelters from branches and pine boughs when the nights grew cold. He kept watch while she slept, and when she woke screaming from nightmares, he held her until the shaking stopped. And slowly, mile by painful mile, they drew closer to California. On the morning of the 4th day, they crested a ridge and looked down at a valley spread out below them, green and gold in the early sunlight, with a river winding through it like a ribbon of silver. "That's California," Rhett said quietly. "We made it." Evelyn stared at the valley, too exhausted to feel joy, too battered to feel relief. All she felt was a kind of numb disbelief, the sense that this couldn't possibly be real, that at any moment she would wake up and find herself back in Yarrington, trapped in Marcus's web. "Are we safe?" she asked. Rhett was quiet for a moment. "Safer. Marcus's influence doesn't reach this far. His bounty hunters will think twice about crossing state lines for a reward that might never get paid." He turned to look at her, and his expression softened. "But you won't be truly safe until you're settled, until you have a new life, a new name if you want one, until Marcus Hale has no reason to keep looking. And then? And then you'll be free." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Really free, the kind of free you deserve. Evelyn looked at him, at this man who had walked through fire for her, who had nearly died a dozen times to keep her safe, and felt something swell in her chest, something too big for words. "I don't want to be free alone," she said softly. Rhett's storm-blue eyes searched her face, looking for something, doubt perhaps, or fear, but all he found was certainty. "You won't be," he said. "I promise." And there, on the ridge overlooking California, with the morning sun warming their faces and the worst of the journey behind them, Evelyn Marston finally let herself believe. They descended into the valley and found a road, a real road, well-maintained and busy with traffic. After days of wilderness, the sight of wagons and carriages and ordinary people going about their ordinary lives felt almost surreal. "There's a town a few miles ahead," Rhett said, consulting a map he had somehow kept dry through all their misadventures. "Small place called Meadow Springs. We can rest there. Send word to Samuel. Arrange transport to Sacramento." "Is it safe?" "Safer than the forest." He gave her a tired smile. "And I don't know about you, but I could use a hot meal and a real bed." Evelyn couldn't argue with that. Meadow Springs proved to be a pleasant little town, clean streets, well-kept buildings, and a general air of prosperity that suggested the gold rush had been kind to it. They found a modest hotel near the center of town and secured 2 rooms, a concession to propriety that felt increasingly absurd given everything they had been through together. "I'll send a telegram to Samuel," Rhett said as they stood in the hotel's small lobby. "Let him know we're coming. You should rest. So should you." "I will. After." Evelyn wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She made her way up to her room, locked the door behind her, and collapsed onto the bed without even removing her muddy boots. She was asleep within seconds. The dream came, as it always did, in fragments. Thomas's face, pale and sweating with fever. The doctor shaking his head. The grave in the small cemetery, the earth still fresh and raw. Marcus standing over her, his cold eyes empty of anything human. And then a new image, Rhett, bleeding on the mountain trail, reaching for her with hands that couldn't quite touch. She woke with a gasp, her heart pounding, her sheets damp with sweat. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The room was dark, the unfamiliar shapes of furniture looming in the shadows. Then memory returned, and she fell back against the pillow, breathing slowly, waiting for her racing heart to calm. A knock at the door made her jump. "Evelyn?" Rhett's voice, muffled but unmistakable. "Are you all right? I heard you cry out." She crossed to the door and opened it, not caring about propriety or appearances. Rhett stood in the hallway, his hair mussed from sleep, his eyes worried. "I'm fine," she said. "Just a nightmare." He studied her face, clearly unconvinced. "Do you want to talk about it?" "No." She shook her head. I don't know what I want. I'm tired, Rhett. So tired. But every time I close my eyes, I see them. Thomas, Marcus, the writers. I can't escape them, even in my dreams." Rhett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "May I come in?" It was improper. It was scandalous. In the world she had left behind, a man entering a woman's hotel room at night would have ruined her reputation forever. But Evelyn didn't care about that world anymore. She stepped aside and Rhett entered, closing the door softly behind him. They sat together on the edge of the bed, not touching, just existing in the same space. The silence between them was comfortable, familiar, the silence of two people who had seen each other at their worst and stayed anyway. "I dream about Charlotte sometimes," Rhett said finally. "My sister. In the dreams, I'm always trying to save her, running toward her, reaching for her. But I never get there in time. I wake up with my hands empty and my heart breaking all over again." Evelyn turned to look at him, seeing the old pain in his eyes, the grief that never fully healed. "Does it ever get easier?" she asked. "The dreams?" "No." He met her gaze and something softened in his expression. "But the waking does. The living. You learn to carry the weight without being crushed by it." He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle. "And it helps to have someone to carry it with." Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes. Not tears of sorrow, but of something else. Something that felt almost like hope. "Stay," she whispered, "just for tonight. I don't want to be alone. Rhett hesitated, and she saw the war playing out behind his eyes. Propriety versus compassion, fear versus desire. Compassion won. All right, he said softly. I'll stay. They lay together on the narrow bed, fully clothed, his arm around her shoulders and her head resting against his chest. It wasn't romantic, not exactly. It was something more fundamental than that. It was two broken people finding shelter in each other, finding warmth in a world that had shown them nothing but cold. Evelyn listened to the steady beat of Rhett's heart, felt the rise and fall of his breathing, and slowly, gradually, the terror of the nightmare faded. Thank you, she murmured. For what? For everything. For saving me. For believing in me. For being here. She felt him press a kiss to the top of her head, soft and reverent. Always, he said. And this time, when she slept, there were no nightmares. The telegram from Samuel arrived the next morning. Evelyn and Rhett were eating breakfast in the hotel's small dining room when the clerk brought it over, a folded piece of paper that Rhett read with growing relief. Samuel's sending a carriage to meet us, he said. It'll be here tomorrow afternoon. He says his family is ready to receive us, that we should consider their home our own for as long as we need. That's generous of him. That's Samuel, Rhett smiled. He's the best man I know. You'll like him. Evelyn nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, they would leave this little town behind, travel to Sacramento, begin building a new life. It felt impossible, unreal. After everything they had been through, the idea of simply existing somewhere safe seemed almost fantastical. What are you thinking? Rhett asked. I'm thinking that I don't know how to be normal anymore. She looked down at her hands, at the blisters and calluses that had formed during their flight through the mountains. For so long, all I could think about was survival, getting away from Marcus, staying one step ahead of his men. Now that it's almost over, I don't know what comes next. Rhett reached across the table and covered her hands with his own. What comes next is whatever you want, he said. A new home, a new name, if you want one. A chance to be whoever you choose to be without anyone telling you otherwise. And you? She looked up at him. What do you want? His storm blue eyes held hers, steady and sure. I want to be wherever you are, he said simply. If you'll have me. She would have answered, would have said yes, 1,000 times yes, but before she could speak, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts, running footsteps, the crash of something heavy hitting the ground. Rhett was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. Stay here. Like hell I will. She followed him to the door of the hotel, where a crowd was gathering in the street. Someone was yelling about bounty hunters, about strangers riding into town, about a woman being hunted. Evelyn's blood ran cold. They found us, she whispered. Rhett grabbed her arm and pulled her back inside, his mind clearly racing. Back door, there has to be a back door. They ran through the hotel, past startled guests and confused staff, until they found a service entrance that led into a narrow alley. Rhett peered out, checking both directions, then nodded. This way, quickly. They moved through the alley, keeping to the shadows, while the sounds of chaos grew louder behind them. Evelyn's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear anything else. Just the thunder of her own fear, the desperate prayer that repeated over and over in her head. Please, please, let us get away. They emerged from the alley at the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open fields and scattered trees. Rhett pointed toward a dense thicket about a quarter-mile away. That's our cover. Once we reach it, there. The shout came from behind them, and Evelyn turned to see 3 riders emerging from between 2 buildings, their horses already at a gallop. Run! Rhett shouted, and they did, sprinting across the open ground with everything they had. But the horses were faster. The riders caught up to them halfway to the thicket, surrounding them in a cloud of dust and heaving horseflesh. Rhett pulled his pistol, but before he could fire, one of the riders leveled a rifle at Evelyn's head. Drop it, the man said, or she dies. Rhett's face went white. For a terrible moment, Evelyn thought he was going to shoot anyway, thought he was going to sacrifice himself in one final desperate gesture. Don't, she said, her voice barely steady. Rhett, please, don't. The pistol fell from his fingers and hit the ground. The lead rider, the man with the red bandana, the one who had haunted their journey like a persistent nightmare, grinned down at them. "Marcus is going to be so pleased," he said. "So very, very pleased." They were bound with rope and loaded onto horses like cargo, Evelyn behind one rider, Rhett behind another. The bandana man, whose name she learned was Cade, led the procession with evident satisfaction, occasionally glancing back to make sure his prizes were still secure. "You gave us quite a chase," he said conversationally, as if they were old friends discussing the weather. "Cost me 2 good men back at that mountain pass? Marcus is going to take that out of your hide, cowboy." Rhett didn't respond. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on some distant point, and Evelyn could see him calculating, always looking for an angle, a weakness, a way out. But there was no way out. Not this time. They rode for hours, stopping only to water the horses and allow the riders to stretch their legs. Evelyn's hands went numb from the ropes around her wrists, and her back ached from the awkward position, but she refused to complain. She refused to give Cade the satisfaction. As the sun began to set, they made camp in a small clearing, a hasty affair of bedrolls and cold provisions, with guards posted at every approach. Evelyn was tied to a tree near the center of the camp, her hands bound in front of her, while Rhett was secured to another tree a few yards away. They were close enough to see each other, but too far to touch. "I'm sorry," Rhett said quietly, when the guards had moved out of earshot. "This is my fault. I should have been more careful." "Don't!" Evelyn cut him off, her voice fierce. "Don't you dare apologize. You did everything you could. You almost got me to safety. If anyone's to blame, it's Marcus." "It doesn't matter who's to blame. What matters is what happens next." "And what does happen next?" Rhett was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Cade will take us back to Nevada, to Marcus. And then—" He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. Evelyn felt ice spread through her veins. She knew what Marcus would do. She had always known, from the moment she first defied him. He would make an example of her, and of Rhett, the man who had dared to help her escape. There would be no trial, no justice, no mercy, only vengeance. "Then we escape again," she said, with a conviction she didn't entirely feel. "We find a way." Rhett looked at her across the firelit darkness, and something shifted in his expression, pain giving way to determination, despair giving way to hope. "You really believe that?" "I have to." She held his gaze, willing him to understand. "I have to believe there's still a chance, because if I stop believing, he wins, and I will not let him win, not after everything we've survived." For a long moment, Rhett just looked at her. This woman who had been through hell and come out fighting, who refused to surrender even when surrender seemed like the only option. Then, slowly, he smiled. "All right," he said, "then we escape again. Together." The night passed slowly, filled with the sounds of the forest and the snores of sleeping men. Evelyn dozed fitfully, her mind racing with half-formed plans and desperate calculations. The ropes around her wrists had loosened slightly. She had been working at them for hours, twisting and pulling until her skin was raw and bleeding, but not enough to slip free. Not yet. Somewhere in the darkest part of the night, she heard movement. Soft footsteps, barely audible, approaching from outside the camp. Her heart seized. More bounty hunters? An animal? Or something else? A figure materialized out of the shadows, small and bent, moving with the careful deliberation of age. Evelyn squinted into the darkness, trying to make out features, and felt a shock of recognition. It was Emmett, the old farmer who had sheltered them 4 nights ago. He crept toward her tree, a knife glinting in his weathered hand, and pressed a finger to his lips when he saw her staring. "Quiet," he breathed. "Martha's got the horses spooked on the far side of camp. Won't last long." He cut through her ropes with quick, efficient strokes, and Evelyn nearly wept with relief as feeling rushed back into her hands. "How did you find us?" she whispered. "Followed your trail, saw them take you." His eyes were hard in the darkness. "Told you there were wolves in these parts. Didn't say they all walked on 4 legs." He moved to free Rhett, and within moments they were both loose, stiff and sore, but free. "This way," Emmett said. Quick now." They followed him through the camp, stepping over sleeping men, holding their breath with every creak and rustle. On the far side, they could hear horses whinnying nervously. Martha's distraction, whatever it was. They slipped into the trees and didn't stop moving until the camp was far behind them. The old farmhouse appeared before dawn, the same weathered structure they had sheltered in before, its windows glowing with lamplight. Martha was waiting at the door, her face creased with worry that melted into relief when she saw them. She ushered them inside, sat them by the fire, pressed hot coffee into their trembling hands. "Thank you," Evelyn said, her voice breaking. "Thank you both. I don't know how we can ever repay you." Emmett waved a dismissive hand. "Don't want payment. Just didn't seem right, letting those men take you. Saw the way you looked at each other. Reminded me of Martha and me, 60 years ago." He glanced at his wife, and something soft passed between them. "Some things are worth protecting." Rhett leaned forward, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. "They'll come looking. When they realize we're gone, let them look." Emmett's jaw set. "They won't find you here. Martha and I know these hills better than any outsider. We'll hide you until it's safe to move." "And when will that be?" "Soon. Word is Marcus Hale's got troubles of his own back in Nevada. His creditors are circling, his friends are distancing themselves. Man's empire is starting to crumble." Emmett smiled grimly. "Sometimes the best revenge is just outlasting your enemies." Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of fear that had been there so long she had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. "Thank you," she said again. It seemed inadequate, but it was all she had. Martha patted her hand. "You rest now, both of you. Morning will come soon enough, and with it, whatever comes next." "Whatever comes next?" Evelyn looked at Rhett across the fire-lit room, and he looked back at her, and in that moment, she knew. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And together, they would survive. They stayed with Emmett and Martha for 5 days. 5 days of healing, of rest, of slowly remembering what it felt like to exist without the constant shadow of fear. Martha tended to their wounds with practiced hands and gentle words, applying poultices to Evelyn's rope-burned wrists and changing the bandages on the gash across Rhett's forehead. Emmett kept watch, his old shotgun always within reach, though no riders came looking for them. Either Cade and his men had given up the chase, or they simply couldn't find the hidden farmhouse tucked away in its valley. Either way, the days passed without incident, and slowly, gradually, Evelyn began to believe that the worst might actually be behind them. On the third morning, she woke to find Rhett standing at the window of the small room they had been given, watching the sun rise over the mountains. He had been doing that a lot lately, standing at windows, staring at horizons, as if he couldn't quite believe they were real. "You're thinking too hard," she said softly, coming to stand beside him. He glanced at her, a faint smile crossing his weathered face. "How can you tell?" "You get this line between your eyebrows, right here." She reached up and touched the spot, feeling him lean into her touch. "What's on your mind?" "Everything. Nothing." He shook his head. "Mostly just trying to figure out what comes next. We can't stay here forever. Emmett and Martha have done more than enough for us already. But the road to Sacramento is still dangerous, and if Marcus's men are still out there, Emmett said Marcus is having troubles of his own. Emmett said a lot of things. Doesn't mean they're all true." Rhett turned to face her fully, his storm blue eyes searching hers. "I need to know you understand what we're walking into. Even if we make it to Samuel's farm, even if we disappear completely, Marcus might not give up. He might keep looking for years. You could spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder." Evelyn considered this, turning the words over in her mind. A week ago, the thought would have terrified her. A week ago, she had been certain that Marcus would hunt her to the ends of the earth, that there was no escape from his shadow. But something had changed in the past 7 days. She had changed. "Then I'll look over my shoulder," she said quietly. "But I won't stop living. I won't let him take that from me. Not anymore." Rhett studied her face, and something shifted in his expression. Wonder, maybe, or admiration. "You really mean that?" "I do." She took his hands in hers, feeling the warmth of his skin, the calluses on his palms. "I spent 3 months being afraid, Rhett. 3 months hiding in my own house, waiting for Marcus to decide my fate. And then you came along and showed me that I had a choice, that I could fight, that I could run. She squeezed his hands. I'm not going back to being that frightened woman, no matter what happens. For a long moment, Rhett just looked at her. Then he lifted her hands to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, tender, reverent, full of unspoken promises. Then let's go make a new life, he said, together. They left the farmhouse on the 6th morning, just as the sun was climbing over the eastern peaks. Emmett had arranged transportation, a sturdy wagon and a pair of fresh horses, along with provisions for the journey and detailed directions to Sacramento. He refused payment despite Rhett's insistence, saying only that some debts couldn't be measured in money. You take care of each other, Martha said, pressing a small package into Evelyn's hands. There's bread and cheese in there, and some of my apple preserves. Should last you a few days. Evelyn hugged the old woman, feeling tears prick at her eyes. Thank you for everything. Just live well, child. That's all the thanks I need. Emmett shook Rhett's hand with surprising strength for a man his age. You got a good woman there, son. Don't let her down. I won't, sir. I promise. And then they were off, rolling down the valley road toward the distant horizon, leaving behind the people who had saved their lives and heading toward a future that felt, for the first time, full of possibility. The journey to Sacramento took 4 days. They traveled openly now, using main roads and stopping at regular inns, no longer afraid of being recognized or reported. Whatever search Marcus had organized seemed to have dissipated, whether because of his own troubles or simply because Evelyn and Rhett had passed beyond its reach, they couldn't say. But with each mile that passed, Evelyn felt the weight on her shoulders grow lighter. The constant vigilance that had defined her existence for so long began to fade, replaced by something that felt almost like peace. And then there was Rhett. During the long hours on the road, they talked. Really talked, the way they hadn't been able to during the desperate flight through the mountains. He told her about his childhood in Texas, about his parents who had died of cholera when he was 12, about the years he had spent drifting from place to place, never belonging anywhere. She told him about her own past, about growing up in Philadelphia, about the father who had gambled away the family fortune, about the mother who had died of a broken heart, about coming west to start over, about meeting Thomas, about the brief, beautiful years they had shared before the fever took him away. Do you miss him? Rhett asked one evening, as they sat beside a campfire under a canopy of stars. It was the first time either of them had acknowledged Thomas directly, and the question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Every day, Evelyn said honestly. I think I always will. He was my first love, Rhett. He saved me when I had nothing and no one. That kind of bond doesn't just disappear because someone dies. She paused, gathering her thoughts, wanting to get this exactly right. But grief isn't the same as life. Thomas would have wanted me to be happy. He told me that near the end. He made me promise that I wouldn't spend my life mourning him. She looked at Rhett, meeting his eyes across the flickering flames. I'm not trying to replace him. I could never replace him. But my heart is bigger than I thought it was. There's room in it for the past and the future both. Rhett was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I've been alone for a long time, he said. After Charlotte died, I convinced myself that I didn't deserve happiness, that caring about someone would only lead to more pain. He shook his head slowly. But then I met you, and everything I thought I knew turned out to be wrong. What do you know now? He looked at her, and the firelight caught the blue of his eyes, turning them to liquid sapphire. I know that I love you, he said simply. I know that I've loved you since that first morning in Yarrington, when you took my hand and decided to trust a dusty stranger with your life. I know that I want to spend whatever time I have left on this earth, making you happy. Evelyn felt her heart swell until it seemed to fill her entire chest. Rhett, you don't have to say anything. He held up a hand. I'm not asking for promises or declarations. I just needed you to know. Whatever happens next, however this story ends, I needed you to know how I feel. She crossed the space between them and took his face in her hands, looking into his eyes with all the emotion she had been holding back. I love you too, she said. I love your strength and your kindness and your stubborn refusal to give up. I love the way you look at me like I'm worth fighting for. I love everything about you, Rhett Callahan. and then she kissed him. It was their first real kiss, not a brush of lips against knuckles or a gentle press against the forehead, but a true kiss, full of passion and longing and the accumulated weight of everything they had been through together. Rhett's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Evelyn melted into him, feeling like she had finally found where she belonged. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and there were tears on Evelyn's cheeks. Tears of joy, of relief, of overwhelming gratitude for this impossible second chance at happiness. "Well," Rhett said, his voice unsteady. "That was long overdue," Evelyn finished for him. He laughed, a real laugh, the first she had heard from him since Yarrington, and pulled her close again. "Yes," he agreed. "Long overdue." They arrived in Sacramento on a bright Thursday afternoon, the streets bustling with merchants and miners and ordinary people going about their ordinary lives. After the wilderness of the Sierra Nevada, the city felt almost overwhelming, too loud, too crowded, too alive. But it was also beautiful and safe and full of possibility. Samuel Price was waiting for them at the agreed-upon meeting point, a small cafe near the edge of town. He was exactly as Evelyn remembered, tall and broad-shouldered, with kind eyes and a quick smile that lit up his whole face. "Evelyn!" He swept her into a hug before she could even speak, nearly lifting her off her feet. "Thank God you made it. When Rhett's telegram came, then nothing for days. I thought the worst." "We ran into some trouble," she admitted, "but Rhett got us through." Samuel released her and turned to clasp Rhett's hand, pulling him into a rough embrace. "You crazy bastard! I asked you to escort a widow to California, not start a war with half of Nevada. You know me. Can't do anything the easy way. Don't I know it?" Samuel stepped back, looking between them with an appraising eye. "There's a story here, a big one, but it can wait until we get you settled." He gestured toward a waiting carriage. "Maria's been cooking for 3 days straight. If you don't come eat her tamales, she'll never forgive me." The Price family farm was about 5 miles outside the city, a sprawling property with a white farmhouse, red barn, and acres of orchard stretching toward the horizon. Maria Price met them at the door, a baby on her hip and a toddler clinging to her skirts, and welcomed them with the kind of warmth that made Evelyn's throat tight. Come in," Maria said, ushering them inside. "You must be exhausted. Samuel, take their things to the guest rooms. Evelyn, dear, sit down before you fall down. Rhett, you look like you haven't eaten in a week. There's food on the table." They were swept up in a whirlwind of activity. Hot meals and warm baths and soft beds and endless questions about their journey. Samuel and Maria listened to the whole story with expressions that shifted from horror to admiration to relief. And when it was over, Samuel sat back in his chair and let out a long, low whistle. "Marcus Hale," he said. "I knew he was bad news, but this... forging Thomas's will, hiring bounty hunters, putting a price on your head. The man's a monster." "A desperate monster," Rhett said. "Emmett said his creditors are closing in. If that's true, he won't have the resources to keep hunting us much longer." "Maybe not. But that doesn't mean the danger is over." Samuel leaned forward, his expression serious. "Evelyn, you need to decide what you want to do. You can stay here as long as you need. Months, years, forever if you want. But at some point, you'll need to build a new life. A new identity, maybe. Something that puts distance between you and the woman Marcus is looking for." Evelyn looked down at her hands, thinking about everything she had lost and everything she had gained. Her old life in Yarrington was gone forever. The store, the house, the respectable position in society. She could never go back to being Mrs. Thomas Marston, widow and businesswoman. But maybe that was all right. Maybe it was time to become someone new. "I want to start over," she said slowly. "Completely. New name, new place, new everything." She looked at Rhett, who was watching her with steady, supportive eyes. "I want to build a life that's mine, that's ours. Something Marcus can never touch." Samuel nodded. "Then that's what we'll do. I know people who can help, lawyers who specialize in this kind of thing, officials who can be persuaded to ask fewer questions. We'll get you settled somewhere safe, somewhere far from Nevada and its problems." "San Francisco," Maria suggested. It's big enough to disappear in, but civilized enough to build a real life. And it's growing so fast that newcomers don't attract attention. Evelyn felt something stir in her chest. Excitement, she realized. Hope for the future. San Francisco, she repeated. I like the sound of that. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity and preparation. Samuel's contacts proved as good as he had promised. Within a fortnight, Evelyn had new documents, a birth certificate, a letter of reference, a complete set of papers that identified her as Evelyn Crawford, a widow from Ohio who had come west to start fresh. It felt strange at first to answer to a different name, but it also felt liberating, like shedding a skin that no longer fit. Rhett, too, began to transform. He sold his horse and his rifle, used the money to buy new clothes, respectable clothes, the kind a businessman might wear. He cut his hair, trimmed his beard, and began speaking to Samuel about opportunities in the construction trade. San Francisco's building like crazy, Samuel explained. New houses, new businesses, new everything. A man who knows how to work with his hands can make a good living there. And Rhett's got more than hands. He's got a head for planning, for seeing how things fit together. He'd make a fine contractor. A contractor, Rhett repeated, as if testing the word. Never thought I'd be anything so settled. Is that bad? Evelyn asked. He looked at her, and a slow smile spread across his face. No, I think it might be exactly what I need. On a cool evening in late spring, 3 weeks after their arrival at the Price farm, Rhett asked Evelyn to walk with him in the orchard. The apple trees were in bloom, their branches heavy with white and pink blossoms that filled the air with sweetness. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird was singing its heart out. They walked in companionable silence for a while, enjoying the peace of the evening. Then Rhett stopped, turning to face her beneath a particularly magnificent tree. I've been thinking, he said. That line between your eyebrows is back. He laughed softly. Yeah, well, this is worth thinking hard about. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small that glinted in the fading light. It was a ring, simple and elegant, with a small sapphire set in silver. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. This was my mother's, Rhett said, his voice unsteady. She gave it to me before she died, told me to save it for the woman I wanted to spend my life with. I've carried it for 20 years, never finding anyone worthy of it. He looked into her eyes, and she saw everything there: love, hope, fear, determination. Until now. Rhett, I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other for a few weeks, but those weeks have been the most important of my life. You've taught me what it means to fight for something, to believe in something, to love something more than my own survival. He took a deep breath. Evelyn Crawford, or whatever name you want to go by, will you marry me? For a moment, Evelyn couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight, her eyes too full of tears. All she could do was look at this man, this incredible, stubborn, brave man who had walked through fire for her, and feel her heart overflow with joy. Yes, she whispered. Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes. Rhett's face transformed, relief and happiness breaking through the nervousness like sun through clouds. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her, and then pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. I love you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I love you too. She pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. I love you, Rhett Callahan, and I can't wait to spend the rest of my life with you. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony in the Price family garden. Maria had insisted on handling the arrangements, and she had outdone herself, flowers everywhere, a beautiful arch covered in climbing roses, chairs set up for the handful of guests they had invited. Samuel served as Rhett's best man, while Maria stood up for Evelyn, and the children ran around underfoot, giggling and throwing flower petals. Evelyn wore a simple dress of pale blue, not white, because this wasn't her first wedding, and she saw no need to pretend otherwise. Rhett wore his new suit, looking uncomfortable but devastatingly handsome, and when he saw her walking toward him down the garden path, his eyes went bright with unshed tears. The ceremony was brief and heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to love and support and protect each other through whatever challenges lay ahead. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Rhett kissed her with such tenderness that Evelyn felt her heart might burst. "I present to you," the minister announced, "Mr. and Mrs. Rhett Callahan." The small crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and Evelyn laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years, lighter than she could ever remember feeling. She was married, she was safe, she was loved. And for the first time since Thomas's death, she was truly, completely happy. They moved to San Francisco a month after the wedding. Samuel had helped them find a small house in a neighborhood called Russian Hill, a modest place but charming, with a view of the bay and room to grow. Rhett threw himself into the construction business with characteristic determination, working long hours and building a reputation for quality and reliability. Within 6 months, he had more work than he could handle and had hired 2 men to help him. Evelyn, meanwhile, discovered a talent she hadn't known she possessed. It started small. She took in some mending to make extra money, and her work was so fine that her neighbors started asking for more complex alterations. Then someone asked her to make a new dress, and then another, and before she knew it, she had a steady stream of customers coming to her door. "You should open a shop," Rhett said one evening, studying the pile of fabric and patterns that had taken over their front room. "You're good at this, Evelyn. Really good." "A shop?" She laughed. "That's ridiculous. I'm just what? Just talented? Just hardworking? Just the best seamstress in San Francisco?" He crossed to where she sat and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "You can do this. I believe in you, and I'll help however I can." She looked into his eyes, seeing the faith there, the absolute certainty that she was capable of anything she set her mind to. And she realized he was right. 6 months later, Crawford's Fine Dressmaking opened its doors on a quiet street in the heart of San Francisco. It was a modest establishment at first, just a single room with a counter, some bolts of fabric, and a sign that Rhett had made himself. But word spread quickly, and soon Evelyn had more orders than she could fill. She hired an assistant, then another, and before the year was out, she had moved to a larger location and was dressing some of the most fashionable women in the city. "I'm proud of you," Rhett said, standing in the doorway of her new shop on opening day. "You know that, right? I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished." Evelyn looked around at the space she had built, the gleaming counters, the beautiful fabrics, the customers browsing through her sample books, and felt a surge of satisfaction so intense it nearly overwhelmed her. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "Sure you could." He crossed to her and put his arms around her waist, pulling her close. "You're the strongest person I've ever known, Evelyn Callahan. You don't need me, you just want me, and that's even better." She smiled and kissed him softly. "I do want you, every day for the rest of my life." "That's the plan." Their first child arrived the following spring, a daughter with Evelyn's auburn hair and Rhett's storm blue eyes. They named her Charlotte, after Rhett's sister, and from the moment she entered the world, she had both her parents wrapped around her tiny finger. Rhett, who had spent so many years alone, who had convinced himself he didn't deserve a family, turned out to be the most devoted father Evelyn had ever seen. He walked the floor with Charlotte when she cried, sang her lullabies in his rough, tuneless voice, and spent hours just watching her sleep, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "She's perfect," he whispered one night, standing beside her cradle. "Absolutely perfect." Evelyn came to stand beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder. "She is, and she's ours. Ours." He said the word like it was something holy. "I never thought I'd have this, Evelyn. A wife, a child, a home. I never thought I deserved it." "You deserve everything," she said fiercely. "Everything good that life has to offer. Don't ever doubt that." He turned to look at her, and she saw tears glistening in his eyes, tears of joy, of gratitude, of overwhelming love. "I won't," he promised. "Not as long as I have you to remind me." The years that followed were good ones. Rhett's construction business flourished, growing from a one-man operation to a respected company that built homes and businesses all across San Francisco. Evelyn's dressmaking shop became one of the most sought-after establishments in the city, known for its quality, its elegance, and the warmth of its proprietress. They moved from their modest house on Russian Hill to a larger home with room for their growing family, Charlotte, and then 2 years later, a son they named Thomas, after the husband Evelyn had lost. It felt right, giving that name to her child. It felt like a way of honoring the past while embracing the future, acknowledging everything that had brought her to this moment, this life, this happiness. They made friends, built a community, became part of the fabric of San Francisco in a way that would have seemed impossible during those desperate days in the Sierra Nevada. Sometimes late at night, Evelyn would lie awake and marvel at how far they had come. From a widow backed into a corner and a drifter with nothing to lose, to this beautiful, improbable, extraordinary life. She never forgot where she came from, never forgot the fear, the desperation, the moment when she had decided to trust a dusty stranger with her fate. Those memories were part of her now, woven into the fabric of who she had become. But they no longer defined her. She was no longer Evelyn Marston, the frightened widow of Yarrington, Nevada. She was Evelyn Callahan, wife and mother and businesswoman, survivor, fighter, builder of her own destiny, and she had never been happier. One evening, 5 years after their arrival in San Francisco, Evelyn and Rhett sat together on the porch of their Russian Hill home, watching the sun set over the bay. The children were asleep inside, Charlotte in her little bed, Thomas in his cradle, and the house was quiet, peaceful, full of the kind of contentment that comes from a life well lived. "Do you ever think about Yarrington?" Evelyn asked. Rhett was quiet for a moment, his arm around her shoulders, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Not often, but sometimes. Usually when I'm trying to fall asleep and my mind won't stop racing." "What do you think about?" "I think about how close we came to losing everything. How many times we should have died and didn't. How one decision, your decision to run, my decision to help you, changed the course of both our lives." He turned to look at her, and she saw the love in his eyes, steady and sure. "And then I think about what we have now. And I know that every risk, every hardship, every moment of terror, it was all worth it, because it led us here." Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes. "I think about that too. About how I almost gave up. How I almost let Marcus win. But you didn't. No, because of you. Because of us." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "We saved each other, Evelyn. That's the truth of it. I was as lost as you were, in my own way. And together, we found our way home." Home. The word resonated in Evelyn's chest, filling her with warmth. For so long she had believed that home was a place, a house, a town, a piece of land. But she understood now that home was something different. Home was the person beside you when the darkness closed in. Home was the voice that told you to keep fighting when you wanted to give up. Home was the hands that caught you when you fell. Home was Rhett. Home was their children. Home was this life they had built together, brick by brick, day by day, from the ashes of everything they had lost. "I love you," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I love you too." He pulled her closer, and together they watched the stars come out one by one until the sky was ablaze with light. And in the quiet of the evening, surrounded by everything she had ever wanted, Evelyn Callahan finally allowed herself to believe that the running was over. She was home. She was safe. She was free. 3 years had passed since that evening on the porch, 8 years since the desperate escape from Yarrington, and Evelyn Callahan had almost stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. Almost. There were still moments, fleeting, unexpected, when the old fear would surface. A stranger's gaze that lingered too long, a shadow in an alleyway that seemed to move with purpose. The sound of hoofbeats approaching too quickly on a quiet street. In those moments, her heart would seize and her breath would catch, and she would be back in Nevada, running for her life with nothing but a carpet bag and a prayer. But those moments came less frequently now, and they passed more quickly. The life she had built in San Francisco was too solid, too real, too full of love and laughter and ordinary joys to be overshadowed by ghosts from the past. Charlotte was 8 years old now, a bright and curious child who had inherited her father's stubbornness and her mother's quiet strength. She spent her days at the small school down the street, her evenings helping in the dress shop, and her weekends trailing after Rhett on his construction sites, asking endless questions about how buildings were made. Thomas was 6, a gentle boy with his namesake's kind eyes and his mother's auburn hair. He preferred books to buildings, stories to sawdust, and Evelyn often found him curled up in a corner of her shop, lost in whatever adventure his imagination had conjured. And then there was the baby, Margaret, named after Evelyn's mother, just 3 months old and already the center of everyone's universe. She slept in a cradle beside Evelyn's cutting table during the day, passed from one doting employee to another, loved beyond measure by everyone who met her. It was a good life, a beautiful life, a life that Evelyn had never dared to imagine during those dark days in Yarrington. And on a gray Tuesday morning in October, it was nearly shattered by a single piece of paper. The telegram arrived just after breakfast. Evelyn was in the kitchen clearing the dishes while Rhett finished his coffee and the children gathered their things for school. She heard the knock at the front door, heard the maid answer it, heard the murmur of voices in the hallway. And then the maid appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face pale, holding a yellow envelope in her trembling hand. "Mrs. Callahan? This just came for you. The boy said it was urgent." Evelyn took the envelope, her heart suddenly racing. Telegrams were rarely good news. She had learned that lesson when Thomas died, when that first terrible message had arrived to tell her that her husband's fever had taken a turn for the worse. She tore open the envelope and read the words inside, and the world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Marcus Hale. Dead. Stop. Heart failure. Stop. Judge Crawford removed from bench. Stop. Investigation into forged documents underway. Stop. Contact Solicitor James Whitfield. Carson City for details. Stop Samuel Price. Evelyn read the telegram 3 times before the words made sense. Marcus was dead. The man who had terrorized her, who had tried to trap her in a forced marriage, who had sent bounty hunters to drag her back to Nevada. He was dead. Gone. No longer a threat to anyone. "Evelyn?" Rhett's voice cut through her shock. He had risen from the table and was crossing toward her, his expression concerned. "What is it? What's wrong?" She couldn't speak. She simply handed him the telegram and watched as he read it, watched as his face went through the same sequence of emotions she had just experienced. Confusion, disbelief, and then a dawning, incredulous hope. "My God," he breathed. "He's dead. Marcus is dead. Heart failure." The words came out strange, distant, as if someone else was saying them. Just like that. After everything he did, everything he tried to do. He just died. Rhett set down the telegram and took her hands, his grip warm and steady. "How do you feel?" It was such a simple question, but Evelyn didn't know how to answer it. She had spent so long being afraid of Marcus Hale, so long looking over her shoulder, so long waiting for him to find her and finish what he had started. And now he was gone, and she didn't know what to feel. Relief? Yes, certainly. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for 8 years seemed to lift, leaving her almost lightheaded. But there was something else too, something unexpected. Grief. Not for Marcus, she would never grieve for him, but for the life she had lost. For Thomas, who had died because of his brother's machinations. For the years she had spent in fear. For the woman she might have been if none of this had ever happened. "I don't know," she admitted. "I feel empty, like I've been carrying something heavy for so long that I don't know how to walk without it." Rhett pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "You don't have to feel anything right now. You don't have to have it all figured out. Just breathe." She buried her face in his chest, inhaling the familiar scent of sawdust and soap, and let herself simply exist in the moment. The children's voices drifted in from the other room. The baby stirred in her cradle. The clock on the mantel ticked away the seconds. Life went on. It always did. But something had changed. Something fundamental had shifted in the universe, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. The details arrived over the following weeks, pieced together from letters and telegrams and the occasional newspaper article that Samuel forwarded from Nevada. Marcus Hale had died in his sleep, the victim of a heart that had finally given out under the strain of years of excess and stress. He had been found by his housekeeper on a Monday morning, slumped in his study chair, a glass of whiskey still in his hand. There was no funeral to speak of. Marcus had outlived most of his family and alienated the rest, and the few people who might have mourned him were too busy trying to salvage what they could from the wreckage of his empire. Because Marcus's empire had been crumbling for years. The gambling debts that Rhett had mentioned all those years ago had only been the beginning. In the years since Evelyn's escape, Marcus had borrowed more and more money to maintain appearances, making increasingly desperate deals with increasingly dangerous people. By the time of his death, he owed more than his entire estate was worth, and his creditors were not the forgiving type. But the real revelation came from Judge Crawford. 2 weeks after Marcus's death, federal marshals had arrived in Yarrington to arrest the judge on charges of corruption and fraud. It seemed that Marcus hadn't been his only client. Crawford had been selling favorable rulings for years, and someone had finally gathered enough evidence to bring him down. Under interrogation, Crawford had confessed everything: the bribes, the fixed trials, the forged documents, including Thomas Marston's will. They found the original, Samuel wrote in a letter that arrived in early November. The real will, the one Thomas actually signed. It was hidden in Crawford's files along with the forged version Marcus used to steal Evelyn's inheritance. The authorities are investigating, and there's talk of restoring the estate to its rightful owner. Evelyn read the letter 3 times, her hands trembling. The estate. Thomas's store. Her home in Yarrington. Everything that Marcus had stolen from her, it could all be returned. She could go back. The thought struck her like lightning, illuminating possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider. She could return to Yarrington, reclaim what was hers, rebuild the life that had been stolen from her. She could have justice. She showed the letter to Rhett that evening after the children were in bed and watched his face as he read it. "What do you want to do?" he asked, setting the letter aside. "I don't know." She paced the length of their sitting room, too agitated to be still. "Part of me wants to go back, to stand in the place where Marcus tried to destroy me and prove that he failed, to reclaim what Thomas and I built together. And the other part?" She stopped pacing and looked at him, at this man who had given her everything, who had built a life with her from nothing, who loved her more completely than she had ever thought possible. "The other part knows that my life is here now, with you, with the children, with everything we've created." She shook her head slowly. "Yarrington was my past, Rhett, but San Francisco is my future, our future. So don't go back. It's not that simple. If I don't go back, if I don't claim the estate, it'll be sold off to pay Marcus's debts. Everything Thomas worked for will disappear, and some part of me feels like I owe it to him to prevent that." Rhett was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then he rose from his chair and crossed to where she stood, taking her hands in his. "What would Thomas want?" he asked gently. The question pierced through all of Evelyn's confusion, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. What would Thomas want? She closed her eyes and thought about her first husband. His kind eyes, his gentle smile, the way he had always put her happiness above everything else. She thought about the promise she had made him before he died, the promise to live fully and love deeply and never let grief consume her. And she knew. "He would want me to be happy," she said. "He would want me to choose the life that brings me joy, not the one that ties me to the past." "And what brings you joy?" She opened her eyes and looked at Rhett, at the man she loved, at the father of her children, at her partner in everything. "You," she said simply. "This life, this family. That's what brings me joy." Rhett smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then that's your answer." She wrote to the solicitor in Carson City the next day. In her letter, she explained that she had no interest in reclaiming the Yarrington estate or any of Thomas's former holdings. She had built a new life in California, she wrote, and she had no desire to return to Nevada, even briefly. Whatever remained of the estate after Marcus's debts were settled could be donated to the town, perhaps to build a school or a hospital or some other institution that would benefit the community. It was what Thomas would have wanted, she was certain. He had loved Yarrington, despite everything his brother had done to poison it. He would have been glad to know that something good had come from all the suffering. The solicitor's response arrived 3 weeks later, confirming that her wishes would be honored. He also enclosed a small package, items that had been recovered from the estate and identified as belonging to her personally. Evelyn opened the package with trembling hands and found, wrapped in faded tissue paper, a single photograph. It was her wedding portrait, the one she had thought lost forever, the one that showed her and Thomas on the happiest day of their lives. She had left it behind when she fled Yarrington, and she had mourned its loss for years. And now, somehow, impossibly, it had found its way back to her. She sat at her kitchen table and wept, holding the photograph against her chest, releasing tears she hadn't known she was still holding. She wept for Thomas, for the life they had shared, for the future they had never gotten to have. She wept for the frightened woman she had been and the strong woman she had become. She wept for all of it, the sorrow and the joy intertwined, impossible to separate. Rhett found her there an hour later, her eyes red but her face peaceful. "What's that?" he asked, nodding toward the photograph. "My past." She held it up so he could see, Thomas's young face, her own hopeful smile, the future stretching out before them full of promise. "I thought it was gone forever, but it came back to me." Rhett studied the photograph for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he pulled a chair up beside her and sat down, his knee touching hers. "He was a good man," he said quietly. "I never met him, but I know he must have been. To have loved you the way he did, to have inspired the kind of loyalty you still feel." "He was." Evelyn traced the edge of the photograph with her finger. "He saved me, Rhett. When I had nothing and no one, he gave me a home. He gave me hope. And then he was taken from me, and I thought I would never recover." "But you did recover." "Because of you." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You didn't replace him, Rhett. You couldn't. No one could. But you showed me that my heart was bigger than I thought, that there was room in it for the past and the future both." She set the photograph down on the table and took his hands in hers. "I'm going to keep this. I'm going to put it somewhere safe, where I can look at it whenever I need to remember. But I want you to know that it doesn't diminish what we have. Nothing could diminish what we have." Rhett lifted her hands to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the same gesture he had made on that first night in the barn, when they had confessed their feelings for each other. "I know," he said. "I've always known. That's one of the things I love about you, Evelyn. You don't forget the people who shaped you. You carry them with you, and you let them make you stronger." "And you?" she asked. "Do you carry Charlotte with you?" He was quiet for a moment, and she saw the old grief flicker in his eyes. Never truly gone, just held at bay. "Every day," he admitted. "Every time I look at our daughter, I see her. Every time I help someone who can't help themselves, I feel her watching. She's part of me, the same way Thomas is part of you. Then we understand each other. We always have." They sat together in the quiet kitchen, holding hands, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built. Outside, the children were playing in the garden, their laughter drifting through the open window. The baby was sleeping in her cradle, her tiny chest rising and falling in the rhythm of perfect peace. It was, Evelyn thought, exactly what she had always wanted, and it was more than she had ever dared to hope for. The following spring, they took a trip. It wasn't to Yarrington. Evelyn had made her peace with that chapter of her life and felt no need to revisit it. Instead, they traveled to Sacramento, to the Price family farm, to the place where their journey had truly begun. Samuel and Maria welcomed them with open arms, their own family grown in the intervening years. There were children everywhere, the Price children, the Callahan children, a chaos of laughter and running feet that filled the old farmhouse to bursting. "It's good to see you," Samuel said, embracing Rhett like a brother. "Both of you, it's been too long." "It has," Rhett agreed. "Life gets busy. You know how it is." "I do indeed." Samuel stepped back and looked at them both, a warm smile on his weathered face. "But you're here now. That's what matters." That evening, after the children had been put to bed and the house had grown quiet, the four adults sat together on the farmhouse porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. "I heard about Marcus," Samuel said, his voice careful, "and about the investigation. How are you handling it?" Evelyn considered the question. "Better than I expected. When the telegram first arrived, I didn't know what to feel. There was relief, of course, but also this strange sense of unfinished business, like the story had ended without a proper conclusion. And now? Now I've made my peace with it." She leaned back in her chair, feeling Rhett's arm settle around her shoulders. "I had this idea for years that I would need to confront Marcus someday, that I would need to stand before him and tell him that he hadn't broken me, that I had survived despite everything he did. I thought I needed that confrontation to truly be free. But you didn't? No, because freedom doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from letting go. She looked out at the stars so bright and clear above the valley. Marcus is dead. Judge Crawford is in prison. The estate is being used to help people instead of hurt them. And I'm here, surrounded by people I love, living a life I never dreamed was possible. That's my victory, Samuel. That's my conclusion. Samuel nodded slowly. Well said. Maria reached over and squeezed Evelyn's hand. I'm proud of you, both of you. What you've accomplished, not just surviving, but thriving. It's remarkable. We had help, Rhett said. Your help. Emmett and Martha's help. The kindness of strangers who chose to do the right thing when it would have been easier to look away. That's how the world works, Samuel said. Or how it should work anyway. People helping people. Light pushing back the darkness, one small act at a time. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the farm, the chirp of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the gentle rustle of wind through the orchard. There's something I've been meaning to tell you, Rhett said finally. Both of you. Samuel raised an eyebrow. Sounds serious. It is. In a good way. Rhett took a deep breath. Evelyn and I have been talking about expanding the business, not just construction, something bigger. A company that builds homes for people who need them. Affordable homes, good homes, for families who can't afford the prices in San Francisco. Samuel leaned forward, intrigued. Go on. We've already bought some land outside the city, enough for a whole neighborhood, and we've got investors lined up, people who believe in what we're trying to do. Rhett's voice was growing more animated, more passionate. But we need partners, people we trust who share our vision, and I can't think of anyone I'd rather work with than you. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, processing the offer. Then a slow smile spread across his face. You want me to move to San Francisco? I want you to help us build something meaningful, something that lasts. Rhett met his old friend's eyes. What do you say? Samuel looked at Maria, and something passed between them. A conversation without words, the kind that only happens between people who have spent decades learning each other's hearts. Then Maria nodded, and Samuel turned back to Rhett with a grin. I say yes. When do we start? And just like that, the future opened up before them, bright and full of possibility. They returned to San Francisco 2 weeks later, their hearts full and their plans taking shape. The years that followed were busy ones. The housing project, which they called Hope Valley, broke ground that autumn and was completed by the following spring. 20 families moved into those first homes, families who had never thought they could afford to own property, families whose children would grow up with stability and security. It was, Evelyn thought, exactly the kind of legacy Thomas would have been proud of, and it was only the beginning. Rhett and Samuel expanded the project, building more neighborhoods, training more workers, changing more lives. Evelyn's dress shop continued to thrive, eventually becoming a small empire of its own. 3 locations across the city, a workshop that employed 24 seamstresses, a reputation for quality that stretched up and down the California coast. The children grew, as children do. Charlotte developed her father's head for business and her mother's eye for detail, and by the time she was 16, she was already helping manage the family's various enterprises. Thomas found his calling in medicine, determined to save lives the way his namesake had been unable to save his own. And little Margaret, who wasn't so little anymore, discovered a passion for teaching that would eventually lead her to open a school of her own. Through it all, Evelyn and Rhett remained partners in everything, in business, in family, in the ongoing project of building a life worth living. They fought sometimes, as all couples do, but they always found their way back to each other. Their love had been forged in fire, tested by trials that would have broken lesser bonds, and it had emerged stronger for the tempering. On the evening of their 20th wedding anniversary, Rhett surprised Evelyn with a private dinner at the restaurant where they had celebrated their first anniversary so many years ago. Do you remember what you said to me that night? He asked, as they sat across from each other in the candlelight. Evelyn smiled. I said a lot of things that night. Which one are you thinking of? You said that running saved you, but choosing me saved your life. The memory surfaced, clear and vivid, and Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes. I remember. I've thought about those words a lot over the years. Rhett reached across the table and took her hand. And I want you to know that it goes both ways. You saved my life too, Evelyn. Before I met you, I was just existing, going through the motions, carrying my grief from place to place, never letting anyone get close enough to matter. And then you looked at me with those fierce, determined eyes and told me you weren't leaving me behind to die. And something inside me shifted, woke up, remembered what it felt like to want something, really want something, for the first time in years. Evelyn squeezed his hand, her heart full to bursting. We saved each other, she said. That's what you told me once. We saved each other. And we're still saving each other, every day, in 1,000 small ways. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. That's what love is, I think. Two people holding each other up, making each other stronger, choosing each other, again and again, no matter what. Is that your anniversary speech? Part of it. He smiled, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. The other part is just, thank you. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for building this extraordinary life with me. Thank you for knocking on my door, she replied. Thank you for giving me a chance to run. We've come a long way from that dusty widow and that drifter cowboy. We have. She looked around the restaurant at the elegant surroundings that would have seemed impossibly luxurious to the frightened woman she had once been. But you know what? I'd go back to that moment in a heartbeat, because it led me here, to you, to our children, to everything. Would you change anything? The question gave her pause. Would she change anything? Would she erase the fear, the pain, the years of looking over her shoulder? No, she said finally. I wouldn't change a thing, because all of it, the good and the bad, the joy and the sorrow, it all made us who we are. It all brought us to this moment. Rhett nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's what I thought you'd say. They walked home that night through the quiet streets of San Francisco, arm in arm under a canopy of stars. The city had changed so much since they had first arrived, grown taller, busier, more crowded, but their neighborhood remained the same. Tree-lined streets, comfortable homes, the distant sound of the bay. Home. As they reached their front porch, Evelyn paused and looked up at the house they had built together. Through the windows, she could see the warm glow of lamplight, could hear the faint sounds of their children moving around inside. What are you thinking? Rhett asked. I'm thinking about that morning in Yarrington, she said slowly. When you knocked on my door, I was so scared, Rhett, so certain that there was no way out, no hope, no future. And now? She turned to look at him, at this man who had been her partner through everything, who had never wavered, never faltered, never stopped believing in her. Now I know that fear is a liar, she said. It tells you that you're trapped, that you're helpless, that you're alone. But it's not true. It's never true. There's always a way forward, if you're brave enough to take it. And if you have someone to take it with. And if you have someone to take it with. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and she leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. I love you, Evelyn Callahan. I love you too, Rhett Callahan, more than I have words to say. Then don't say anything. Just stay here with me, for a moment. They stood together on the porch of their home, holding each other in the darkness, and Evelyn let herself feel the full weight of everything they had been through, the fear and the flight, the chase through the mountains, the capture and the rescue, the long road to safety, the building of a new life, piece by piece, day by day. It had been hard, harder than anything she had ever imagined, but it had also been worth it. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of despair. Worth it, because it had led her here, to this porch, to this man, to this life. She pulled back slightly and looked into Rhett's eyes, seeing her own reflection there, older now, wiser, but still recognizably herself. Ready to go inside? She asked. He smiled. Wherever we go next, we choose it together. It was what he had said to her all those years ago, in the warm glow of their San Francisco parlor, when she had whispered that running had saved her, but choosing him had saved her life. And she answered now as she had answered then. Together. They walked into their home, closing the door behind them on the darkness and the past. Inside, their children were waiting. Their life was waiting. Their future was waiting. And Evelyn Callahan, née Marston, born in Philadelphia, escaped from Yarrington, reborn in San Francisco, stepped forward to meet it. Not running anymore. Not hiding. Not afraid. Just living. Fully, completely, joyfully living. The way she had always been meant to. The way Thomas would have wanted. The way Rhett had helped her remember. And as the door closed behind her and the lamplight enveloped her in its golden glow, she knew, with a certainty that went beyond words, beyond thought, beyond anything she had ever felt, that this was how the story was supposed to end. Not with vengeance, not with confrontation, not with the dramatic defeat of her enemies, but with this, with love, with family, with peace, with home. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Evelyn sat at her dressing table and looked at herself in the mirror. The face that looked back at her was lined now, touched by time and experience. But her eyes were still clear, still fierce, still full of the determination that had carried her through the darkest days of her life. She opened a drawer and pulled out Thomas's photograph, the one that had been returned to her from Yarrington, and looked at it for a long moment. "We did it," she whispered. "We survived. We built something beautiful." And though the photograph couldn't answer, she could have sworn she felt a warmth in the room, a presence, a blessing from somewhere beyond. She pressed the photograph to her heart, closed her eyes, and smiled. Then she put it away, rose from the table, and went to join her husband in bed. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, and the bay shimmered in the moonlight, and San Francisco slept. And somewhere in the quiet night, a story that had begun with fear and desperation ended with love and hope and the promise of tomorrow. A complete story, a closed chapter, a life well lived,